Chapter 249. That night, how did you shoot those mounted bandits? It's simple. I used my psyche power to locate them in the dark. But how did you locate their vital parts? Psyche power. How did you do it from such a long distance? Because my psyche power is very strong. But you don't have a good aptitude for cultivation. The amount of chi of heaven and earth you can control is so little. Needles are not as heavy as knives, but they can still stab people. It's really a strange idea. And, don't you think it's a waste to fight in this way? It consumes too much psyche power in the sense of perception to lock the opponent's position and figure. As I said before, my psyche power is very strong. Have you ever thought about becoming a psyche master? No. Why? Because I'm a genius in talisman Taoism. Of course I want to become a talisman master like you. That night when you killed the deacon of the Divine Hall, you didn't use a talisman. I'm used to using a knife. There are talismans carved on the knife. Your fighting style is really different from ordinary cultivators. I'm a genius. Of course I don't take the ordinary path. But why do I always feel that it's a forced choice? My pride has been hurt by you again. I won't lie. That's why you can hurt me. Do you feel that the chi of heaven and earth in the forest at the foot of the mountain is very rich? Yes, a little. You don't seem to care much about the aura between heaven and earth. I care more about the aura in my body. From the snow ridge of the wilderness to the foot of the Tsang mountain, this kind of conversation kept happening between Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan. Sometimes Ning Ke's mind became a little confused. He always felt that he had returned to the back of the mountain of the academy or the old library, talking nonsense with the annoying guy Chen Pippi. The discussion in his eyes was nonsense, but it was very important to Mo Shanshan. This young heavenly son, who was obsessed with calligraphy and talisman, gradually deepened her understanding of Ning Ke's cultivation method through these conversations. Then, as the two of them got closer to the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain, her expression became more and more worried, and a little lost and helpless. The two rested beside a tiny hot spring. Ning Ke looked at her slightly drooping eyelids and her long eyelashes resting on her fair skin. He thought of her emotional changes along the way and could no longer suppress the confusion in his heart. He asked seriously, "What are you worried about?" Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at Ning Ke silently, as if she was watching the most dazzling gem gradually being buried by the wind and sand. Her eyes were full of worry and worry. She said softly, "I'm worried that you will join the devil." Ning Ke was slightly startled and then laughed. Influenced by the novels in that world, because of his life experience in this world, and because of the open-minded environment of the academy, it was really difficult for him to instinctively resist and dislike the devil's doctrine. But he was a very realistic person. He understood that his thoughts might not be wrong, but if he really cultivated the devil's doctrine's cultivation method, it would definitely lead to countless troubles. He said with a smile, "I'm the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Naturally, I can't be like those poor people who have been insulted and hurt but are unable to retaliate. I can't sell my soul to the devil for things like power or power." Mo Shanshan quietly looked at his clean and pleasant face. Thinking of what she had seen and heard along the way, she was more and more sure that he was a guy who did not care about the means to achieve his goals. She could not feel that he had the slightest fear for Haotian at all. And the cultivation method he chose now, whether passively or actively, was particularly focused on his own physical skills. He rarely studied how to communicate with the breath of heaven and earth. If he continued on this path, it would be easy to step into the wrong path. Especially now that he was getting closer and closer to the mountain that was abandoned by Haotian. Mo Shanshan reached out to pick up the snowflakes by the hot spring and gently blew them off. She expressionlessly looked at the black and white mountain range not far away. After a long silence, she said, "Can you promise me one thing?" Ning Ke asked, "What is it?" Mo Shanshan looked back at him and said seriously, if you encounter the devil's doctrine's cultivation method in this mountain, don't learn it. Hearing this, Ning Ke could not help but be stunned. He looked at the desolate mountain range that stretched between heaven and earth in the distance. He thought that he had heard from the desolate man's tribe that people from the divine hall had entered this mountain and guessed that it had something to do with the tomes of arcane. Why did Mo Shanshan suddenly mention the devil's doctrine's cultivation method? Mo Shanshan's eyelashes fluttered slightly and she softly said, the front gate of the devil's doctrine is in this mountain range that was abandoned by Haotian. However, the mountain is so vast that not many people know where it is except for the senior sublime being who destroyed the front gate. Ning Ke gradually digested the shock in his heart. He frowned and looked at the mountain range. After a moment of silence, he said, I really don't know about this. No one told me about it. The information given to me by the desolate man's tribe was very clear. The people from the divine hall snuck into the wilderness to cause trouble to attract the attention of the powerhouses of the desolate man and the senior patriarch society. The real powerhouses of the divine hall had all snuck into this mountain. The information given to me by Chang and was that the divine hall wanted to find the tomes of arcane and they thought that the tomes of arcane was in the desolate man's tribe. That was why I was a little curious as to why they would enter the mountain. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Mo Shanshan with a frown. He said, if the divine hall thought that the tomes of arcane was still in the front gate of the devil's doctrine and that the front gate of the devil's doctrine had always been in Tianqi Mountain, then why didn't the people from the divine hall come to find the tomes of arcane before? Why did they only come to look for it when the desolate man was heading south? Mo Shanshan shook her head and used her fingers to tuck the fluttering strands of hair behind her ears. She said, once an otherworldly item like the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane appears in the world, it must respond to the heavenly secret. This is not an opportunity that you and I can understand or guess. However, in my opinion, the possibility of the tomes of arcane being in the desolate man's tribe is certainly not as high as the front gate of the devil's doctrine. Ning Ke asked, why? Mo Shanshan answered, because things like the tomes of arcane should originally be in the unknown place. The conversation in the sparse forest at the foot of the mountain constantly shocked Ning Quebec. He vaguely remembered that he should have heard of the unknown place, but he could not remember what it was about. He asked seriously, what is the unknown place? Mo Shanshan was stunned and realized that he was not joking. She answered seriously, it is a place that people can't reach. Ning Ke rubbed his eyebrows and said helplessly, can you be more specific? Mo Shanshan frowned and looked at him as if she was looking at a very strange tree. After a moment of silence, she said, the unknown place refers to those mysterious places outside the secular world. Very few people can see these places with their own eyes. Even those who have been there will not talk about it after they come out. Therefore, for thousands of years, only some legends about the unknown place have been circulating in the cultivation world. Ning Ke did not explain further. He said, if the divine hall is not counted as the unknown place, then I think the devil's doctrine is just a branch of the divine hall. Why is its front gate called the unknown place? Upon hearing this question, Mo Shanshan answered very seriously, when I was young, I once asked my teacher. According to my teacher, it is because the great divine priest of light who founded the devil's doctrine had already become an unparalleled demon who surpassed the 5 states when he established the front gate of the devil's doctrine. That is why there is such a saying. Surpassed the 5 states. Ning Ke thought of the legendary sages that Elder Lu Qingchen had told him about. Those terrifying great states of Tianqi and Limitless made his mind shake. He felt that those unknown places were so far away and untouchable. Apart from the abandoned front gate of the devil's doctrine, I believe that there must be the existence of powerhouses who surpass the 5 states in other unknown places. However, these powerhouses are few in number and basically do not appear in the world. Only a young disciple will appear in the human world every few years and is called the World Wayfarer. Once these World Wayfarer appear in the human world, they are grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. Even Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, the strongest powerhouse in the world in the South Jin Kingdom, will be afraid of them. Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Ke with a very complicated look. The message in her eyes seemed to be saying that what she had just said was not the same as what she had seen with her own eyes. Therefore, she was not confident. Ning Ke did not notice the look in her eyes. He was still immersed in the shock brought by these secrets of the cultivation world. He recalled his daily life in the back of the mountain of the academy and became more and more angry that second brother, third sister, and Chen Pipi did not even tell him such an important thing. He frowned and said, if things like the tomes of arcane can only exist in the unknown places, then those who are qualified to snatch the tomes of arcane should be those world wayfarer from the unknown places. I originally thought that I might encounter competitors at most at the level of the Tao Addict or Long Qing, so I could always compete with them. However, if I encounter those grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, it seems that I can't compete with them. For some reason, Mo Shanshan felt that she completely did not understand what this guy was trying to say. She frowned and asked, what on earth are you thinking about? Ning Ke looked at her and said very sincerely and honestly, I am thinking if we should go back to the south immediately. If you are not happy about it, I can take you to Chang'an City to play and eat osmanthus cake. Mo Shanshan opened her eyes wide and looked at him inexplicably. She did not know what to say. Ning Ke did not know what to say either. He fell into a long silence and thought. It was really a bit inexplicable that the trip to the wilderness had developed to the present situation. Big events jumped in front of him one after another, and no one had warned him in advance. Even such important news as the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane was not told to him until the last moment. No matter how he looked at it, this kind of response and planning ability did not match the reputation of the Tang Empire and the Academy. His Majesty and the nation Master Li Qingshan would not harm him, and Master Yen Sei would not harm him either. His senior brothers and sisters in the Academy might not be involved in this matter, but if it involved the unknown places, he did not believe that second brother would not have any interest in it. But why did these guys let him come without saying anything? As a guy who participated in the practice for the first time in the history of the second floor of the Academy, His Majesty and the elders in the South School might have other ideas. But what was second brother thinking? Ning Ke became more and more lost in thought. His eyes gradually brightened, and then suddenly dimmed as if he was suffering from some kind of horror. His body became very stiff. That was because he remembered a passage that went like this, Fate itself is a very cruel fellow. If it wants to choose you to undertake a mission, then before it is sure that you are able to undertake this mission, it will do everything it can to break every bone in your body, strip every bit of your flesh, and make you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your will and temperament be strong enough to qualify to be chosen by fate. This passage was told to him by Chen Pipi. This passage was told to Chen Pipi by second brother. This passage was told to him by the legendary youngest uncle. Everyone in the back of the mountain of the Academy knew that second brother was the most brainless follower of youngest uncle and the most fanatical fan. He wanted to be close to youngest uncle no matter in words, deeds or style of doing things. Thinking of the famous words of youngest uncle, second brother threw Ning Ke into the vast wilderness and let him, a weak person in the no-doubt state, face many powerhouses in the divine hall, world wayfarers from the unknown place, and face a miserable life. Then he got the answer. Ning Ke could not help but shiver. He looked at the mountain innocently and helplessly like a drowning child. In his heart, he had already cursed second brother and called him the ancient crown on his head, a wooden club. At this time, the big black horse went somewhere to fill its stomach, and slowly walked back with resentment in its eyes. Ning Ke looked at the big black horse and thought of its insufferably arrogant performance in the royal court horse race. He gradually calmed down the fear and uneasiness in his heart. He frowned and thought for a long time, and suddenly asked, is the result more important or the process? Mo Shanshan was slightly startled and answered, I think it's the process. Ning Ke shook his head and said, I used to think it was the result. Later when I comprehended talisman, I thought it was the process that mattered. Now I understand that both are equally important. But without the process, there is no result. Mo Shanshan said, you are not a person who is used to saying such things. Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly laughed. He said, because I have confirmed my purpose of coming to the wilderness. What is it? It has nothing to do with the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and the front gate of the devil's doctrine. The reason I came to the wilderness in the beginning was to participate in the academy's practice. The purpose of those academy students' practice is to march and fight, and my purpose of practice is naturally to cultivate. Ning Ke said in a very affirmative tone, the academy let me come to the wilderness, hoping that I can understand something in this process. This is the process, and breaking the state into the see-through state is the purpose of this cultivation journey. Mo Shanshan slowly raised her eyebrows and said incredulously, you understood it at the beginning of spring, felt it at the end of spring, and then the no-doubt state. Do you want to break the state into the see-through state in less than a year? Ning Ke said seriously, I have told you before that I am not far from the see-through state. Mo Shanshan gently shook her head and said, Wang Jinglu of the Tang dynasty entered the see-through state at the age of 16, but he was enlightened at the age of 4. I entered the see-through state at the age of 14, but I was enlightened at the age of 3. I don't know about the Tao addict, but Prince Long Qing entered the see-through state at a younger age, but I believe he also spent a long time. I have never heard of anyone who entered the see-through state within a year. Even if you are the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, you have not even seen the headmaster of the academy. This idea is really. Ning Ke smiled and thought, that is because you have not stayed in the back of the mountain of the academy. There are too many freaks in cultivation there. However, except for second brother, the rest of the senior brothers and senior sisters seem not to be interested in cultivation. If they put their obsession with chess, zither, flowers and other miscellaneous things into cultivation, they might have already entered the knowing destiny state. Thinking of the great senior brothers and senior sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Ke regained his confidence. Looking at the vast snow mountains, he was full of pride and said loudly, are world wayfarers so great? Hearing this, Mo Shanshan's thin red lips slightly opened, but she could not say a word. She thought with a complicated and angry expression, how could I fall in love with such a stupid person in the summer by the ink lake? Ning Ke looked at her speechless expression and laughed proudly. He said, don't be shocked, don't admire me. I am a person chosen by God who dares to face the bleak life, cruel fate, dripping blood, and countless dangers. Prince Long Qing stood between the black rock walls, tired of the dark clouds in front of him and the flying snow in the distance. He looked back at the deep desolate and deep mountain range. This mountain range was originally the end of the northern foot of Min Mountain, but it was called Tianqi Mountain Range in the language of grassland barbarians and the records of the Divine Hall. After the great divine priest of light betrayed the Divine Hall and founded the Devil's Doctrine, he led his followers to build the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in this mountain range. From that day on, this mountain range eroded by filth was abandoned by Haotian. A small snowflake was brought from the cliff to his face by the wind, but it could not touch his beautiful face and flew away, which made him gradually frown. After 1,000 years, another great divine priest of light betrayed the Divine Hall. He did not know what kind of stain it would bring to the glory of Haotian and what kind of damage it would cause to the cause of the Divine Hall. Although he was the God's favored one who was cultivated by the Divine Hall and was the perfect Son of God in the eyes of the world, he was still young and inexperienced. Above him were the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, the great divine priest of judgment, and the hierarch lord. He was not qualified to participate in the betrayal of the great divine priest of light and could only think about it. The great divine priest of light destroyed the confinement, left the Yu prison, and betrayed the Peach Mountain, which made the West Hill divine palace fall into great chaos. Almost at the same time, the great divine priest of revelation who returned from the south sent a Haotian edict at the cost of half of his hair turning white. Sensing the desolate man's southward movement, the filthy unknown place in Tianqi Mountain reappeared after decades. The divine hall had never given up looking for the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane lost in the wilderness. After the madman split the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine into ruins with a single sword, it was said that someone from Haotian Taoism had personally searched for it once, but found nothing. Therefore, the divine hall had always thought that the tomes of arcane had been taken to the cold region of the far north by the desolate man. However, at this time, the great divine priest of revelation issued such an edict. Prince Long Qing's frown deepened. It did not affect his handsome face, but it looked a little serious. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was the only unknown place that had been destroyed. Once it was reopened, many things would definitely be found. Those things were probably no different from garbage to the madman and the person who went to search for the tomes of arcane. But for the Tao addict and other young cultivators in the world, they were very precious. He believed in Haotian fervently and yearned for the light. Naturally, he would not be interested in those filthy and dark Devil's Doctrine skills. But after all, he was the priest of the judicial department and knew some historical truths that had been annihilated by time. He thought that even if he could not find the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, if he could inherit the mantle of the madman, this trip would be very meaningful. But how much lucky chance did it require? Prince Long Qing looked at the mountain that had been abandoned by Haotian and said calmly, "This is also a kind of cultivation." Dozens of feet below the cliff, a deacon of the judicial department dressed in black appeared. The deacon humbly bowed to Prince Long Qing and then said a few words. His voice was blown intermittently by the cold wind between the mountains. Ordinary people could not hear it, but it was very clear in Prince Long Qing's ears. All the masters of the divine hall had come out. The powerhouses of the desolate man's tribe and even a few elders of the senior statesman society had been attracted to the west. The Tianqi Mountain in the east now seemed very empty, but there are 3 deacons missing. Prince Long Qing looked at the subordinate under the cliff expressionlessly. It seemed that he was simply asking, without the slightest emotion. Only he himself knew that when he heard the name of the deacon, he was a little annoyed. One of the 3 missing deacons was called Luo Weiyang, who was at the lower stage of the see-through realm. He was a very capable subordinate of Prince Long Qing. But this was not a big deal. The important thing was that he was Luo Kadi's brother. Luo Kadi himself was not a big deal. The important thing was that he was the most favored commander of the divine guards of the hierarch lord. Because of his gloomy expression, the subordinate under the cliff became more and more nervous. He lowered his head and continued to report, "Mr. 13 from the 2nd floor of the academy has also left the palace. He should be coming here. The specific route is unknown. I only know that he should be traveling with the calligraphy addict from the Black Ink Garden." Prince Long Qing slowly raised his sword-like eyebrows and a faint smile appeared on his face. He said to himself, "It's a little interesting. He has actually begun to travel around the world. But has there ever been a world wayfarer as weak as you in the past 1,000 years?" Then his smile gradually faded and turned into frost as the cold wind brushed against his cheeks. As a young powerhouse who was absolutely qualified to be proud, Prince Long Qing had only lost to Ning Ke once in his life. So after hearing Ning Ke's name, his pride naturally turned into anger and displeasure. Although he hid it very well and was still calm and peaceful, from climbing the mountain in spring to climbing the mountain in the harsh winter today, no one in the divine hall could see it. But he knew that the anger and displeasure had always been there. When he left Chang, and in spring, thanks to that failure, he saw the threshold of the knowing destiny state waiting for him on the other side of the mountain. But it was also because of that failure that he saw the threshold on the other side of the mountain. He had no way to get close to it, let alone cross it. Anger and displeasure would not have an essential impact on the Taoist heart. But the hidden unwillingness and imbalance were definitely the greatest damage to the clarity of the Taoist heart. He was very proud, so he was unwilling. He did not dare to question the headmaster's choice, but he believed that the academy examination was not presided over by the headmaster himself. So there must be other reasons why he lost to Ning Quebec. Because he could not be worse than Ning Quebec. To prove this, he needed to defeat or even destroy that guy in all aspects. The great divine priest of judgment had said so. The hierarch had not said so, but his cold eyes had said so before he left. Yi Hongyu, that crazy woman, had also said so with her scornful smile. So he knew he had to do this. "I'll wait for you in this mountain." Prince Longqing looked at the black and lowly stones at the foot of the snow-capped peak and said with a self-mocking smile, "I'm about to become the first person in history to defeat a world wayfarer. Why don't I feel any sense of accomplishment?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 250. Hatred, unwillingness, anxiety, and fear were the most terrible mental obstacles for cultivators. They were like pieces of firewood, suspended beside the Taoist heart and became a fence, blocking the fresh wind and water outside the fence. If this situation lasted for too long, things inside the fence would gradually wither. Prince Longqing's failure to reach the back of the mountain of the academy was the first hurdle on his road. Ning Ke was the firewood outside Prince Longqing's Taoist heart. One of the important purposes of his cultivation in the wilderness was to remove this firewood. There were many ways to break the fence of the Taoist heart, such as penance, understanding the classics, or forcing oneself into a desperate situation. But there was no doubt that the simplest way was to chop the firewood into sawdust and blow it away with the wind. So when Prince Longqing knew that the firewood called Ning Ke had come by itself and that the fence outside his Taoist heart could be broken, his Taoist heart, which was covered by dust, gradually brightened. He felt a gush of open air gushing out from his chest and abdomen, and he wanted to roar at the vast mountains like the sea. At this moment, the world in his eyes was different. The aura of heaven and earth flowed slowly between the snow-capped peaks and the black rocks, and the rich and complicated flowing law seemed to be grasped. A door appeared in the clear air between the big mountains in the distance, and it was much clearer than before. Push open the door and cross the threshold, and you would know your destiny. Prince Longqing clasped his hands behind his back and looked at that place with passion. He was silent for a long time. After a long time, he slowly withdrew his gaze and looked at a snow tree beside him. As far as his eyes could see, the snow on the branches gradually turned into water. The water droplets with the dead branches and gathered on the branches, and then condensed into a crystal water droplet, which quickly turned into ice in the cold mountain wind. In the process of the water droplet freezing, it seemed that there was a wonderful knife in the wind, which did not condense the water droplet into a circle or an oval, but gradually opened, peeling off one by one until it took shape. It was a crystal and transparent peach blossom, but it gave people a feeling of fresh and beautiful. The colorless pure water was ice, but it seemed to show colors visually, which was very magical. Prince Longqing quietly looked at the ice peach blossoms swaying gently in the wind. There was no pride or satisfaction on his beautiful face. Instead, there was a touch of self-mockery between his handsome eyebrows. He softly sighed and said, "Only half a minute left." In the spring, he returned to the West Hill from the Tang Empire. In the carriage leaving Chang'an, he once thought that he was about to enter the knowing destiny state, and that he might even complete it during the journey. However, what happened later made him wake up from this emotion, and then he calmly returned to cultivation. On the long road of cultivation, there was no turning back once one stepped on it. At the beginning, it was extremely fast, but the further one went, the more dangerous it became. The knowing destiny threshold that separated the grand cultivators from the ordinary cultivators was even more towering and extremely difficult to climb. Although he had already seen it, he did not know how long it would take for him to approach and cross it. However, Prince Longqing did not feel depressed because he was still very young, and he had already seen the threshold. Compared to those people who had cultivated for hundreds of years but still did not know where the treasure mountain was, he had enough right to be proud, especially at this moment. He knew that he had moved closer to that threshold. When it came to breaking the realm, every step forward was so difficult, so every step forward was so touching and even intoxicating. The snow on dozens of bare branches of the winter tree had all melted, and all the snow flowed to the branches, condensing into crystal clear peach blossoms, reflecting the light from the sky, so beautiful that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Prince Longqing stretched out his jade-like right hand from his black sleeve and gently pinched an ice peach blossom with 3 fingers. He held it in the air and looked at it against the sun for a long time, and then softly sighed, "Longqing, you are really strong." At this moment, a clear and childish voice suddenly sounded in the distance, full of surprise and curiosity. "Are you people from the Central Plains all so thick-skinned?" Prince Longqing stopped smiling and looked in that direction with no expression on his face. On the cliff of the covered snow mountain stood a young girl with a childish face. The girl was tightly wrapped in a lot of ragged fur, wearing a pair of dirty old black boots and a leather hat on her head. Her black and beautiful hair was braided into a long and thick braid, hanging between her knees and swaying constantly. A furry beast tail covered most of her face, but it could not cover the childishness between her eyebrows. Prince Longqing did not sense the fluctuation of psyche power from the girl, and slightly raised his eyebrows, thinking that if she was an ordinary person, how could she appear in the bone-chilling Tianqi mountain, and why did he not notice her? He thought of a possibility, and asked with a slightly cold gaze, the desolate man returning to the south. The girl looked no more than 15 or 16 years old, and her little face was stimulated by the cold wind blowing between the mountains, and her little face was red. Hearing his question, she nodded hard and then said, "I am Tang Xiaotang, and you?" Prince Longqing did not answer, but looked at the white furry beast beside the girl, frowned and asked, "A rabbit?" Tang Xiaotang shook her head and said, "Not a rabbit, a cute little white wolf." Prince Longqing did not want to say anything more to the desolate girl, and his fingertips gently turned the ice peach blossom, ready to let her return to Haotian's divine kingdom. The little snow wolf that had been quietly squatting by Tang Xiaotang's side suddenly stood up with its front paws on the ground. It bared its teeth and howled warily at him. But the snow wolf was too small. Even though the snow-white fur on its body stood up, it only looked like a bigger snowball. It was incomparably cute. How was it the least bit scary? Prince Longqing thought of the white horse given to him by his fiancée, and suddenly smiled. He thought that when he killed the desolate girl later, he could not hurt this rare little snow wolf. She would definitely like it if he gave it to her. Tang Xiaotang did not feel uneasy because of the little snow wolf's vigilance, and her black eyes were full of smiles. She looked at Prince Longqing and asked, "Do you want to kill me?" In the vast snow-capped mountains, where there was no sign of human habitation, a cute girl of 15 or 16 years old faced a strange man who had the intention to kill her, and asked him smilingly if he wanted to kill her. She did not show any fear at all, so there could only be 2 situations. Either she was a silly girl, or she was the real scary person. Prince Longqing's lips curled up slightly, and he laughed at himself. He thought that there had been such a situation in those boring and even rotten novels. He believed that this desolate girl might be a little strange, but there had never been a girl in this world who could threaten him at such a young age. As he thought of this, an extremely bright red appeared in front of him, like a koi fish wagging its tail in a lake. That red appeared a few years ago, and represented a past that made him feel extremely unhappy. Because of this memory, he became a little agitated, and his face gradually darkened. His beautiful face gradually turned into an ice peach blossom between his fingers. He looked at Tang Xiaotang expressionlessly and said, "I have killed many remnants of the devil's doctrine, but I have not killed the remnants of the devil's doctrine among the desolate men migrating to the south. Little girl, you should feel honored. Tang Xiaotang giggled, and stretched her little hand behind her back. She looked at Prince Longqing who was under a tree in the distance, and said happily, I have killed many animals like wolves and sheep, but I have not killed anyone from the divine hall. You should feel honored. Her soft laughter represented contempt, and contempt represented provocation. In Prince Longqing's view, a provocation to him was a provocation to the divine hall, and disrespectful to Haotian. So he became angrier, but his expression became calmer. No matter how he looked at it, this was definitely a one-sided battle. It was more like an adult bullying a little girl. However, unexpectedly, the first one to attack was the little girl wrapped in tattered animal skin. Tang Xiaotang did not attack with her hands. It was her feet. She stepped on the snow, and a deep footprint appeared on the snow. It was so deep that it seemed to be going into the ground. However, her seemingly ordinary black and dirty boot was only slightly deformed, and did not break. Then, Tang Xiaotang began to run toward the winter tree full of ice peach blossoms. Every time she stepped on the snowy ground, a large snowflake would be stirred up. It was as if her small body was a heavy mountain, causing the entire cliff to tremble slightly. The crystal-clear ice peach blossoms were shaken and fell from the branches to the ground. Tang Xiaotang came with the blizzard. Prince Longqing's pupils shrank slightly. His right hand, which hung outside his black Taoist robe, shook slightly. The falling ice peach blossoms were stimulated by the fluctuation of the primordial qi between heaven and earth. They whizzed through the air like countless feathered arrows, and instantly arrived in front of Tang Xiaotang. These crystal-clear ice peach blossoms reflected beautiful light under the sunlight, and set up layers of obstacles between the cliffs. The seemingly fragile petals contained an extremely powerful force. The cold wind blew against Tang Xiaotang's blushing face, and the beast tail that covered her face made a whistling sound. Her speed was too fast, so fast that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. No one knew how such a small and skinny body could contain such a huge amount of energy, and no one could imagine how her slender legs could not be broken under such speed. Because of the speed, when the beautiful and terrifying ice peach blossoms appeared in front of her, they were already very close to her young face, and it was impossible for her to avoid them at her current speed. Tang Xiaotang had learned how to fight from her brother since she was a child, and did not know what avoidance was. When she ran at a high speed, her right hand had been stretched out behind her. At this time, looking at the sky full of ice peach blossoms, she finally pulled it out. She pulled out a huge blood-red scimitar. This scimitar was ridiculously large, and especially when compared with her thin body, it looked especially terrifying. The blade was redder than blood, and no one knew where this scimitar had been hidden in her body. The blood-red huge scimitar slashed down from the sky, making a whistling sound. The transparent ice peach blossoms cracked with the sound, and shattered into pieces of ice all over the ground. Prince Longqing's Taoist magic was naturally not so simple. When the transparent ice peach blossoms shattered, an extremely powerful qi of heaven and earth surged out from the ice peach. However, at this time, Tang Xiaotang had already run more than 100 feet away, and had already split open the fifth ice peach blossoms. After the peach blossoms split open, they turned into useless ice gravel and fell to the ground. The Taoist magic contained in the peach blossoms set off countless air waves between the cliffs, and shook up the snow and black rocks. However, it could not catch up with Tang Xiaotang's speed, and could only serve as a foil to the little girl's momentum, which made her look so dispirited and useless. The blood-red huge scimitar in Tang Xiaotang's small hand split open 1 peach blossoms, 2 peach blossoms, and 3 peach blossoms. Then it slashed in front of Prince Longqing. Prince Longqing's eyes suddenly brightened, and he gently pushed the ice peach blossoms in his right hand forward, blocking the blade of the blood-red huge scimitar. The transparent petals instantly bloomed, extremely flourishing. The sharp blade. The seemingly fragile ice peach blossoms. Once they met. It was better than countless things in the human world. Between the snow cliffs, the chi of heaven and earth shook violently. The winter tree that had just borne countless peach blossoms was torn into pieces by the turbulence in the air. Prince Longqing snorted softly, but did not take a step back. But the band that tied his black hair suddenly broke, and his black hair fell down like a waterfall, making him look a little embarrassed. His pale right hand that was holding the ice peach blossoms trembled slightly. An extremely tiny crack appeared on the ice peach blossoms between his fingers. Tang Xiaotang, like a nimble bird, stepped lightly on the smoke, and flipped back, landing lightly on the snow. She giggled and looked at Prince Longqing, whose black hair was messy. She said, "You're really pretty, just like those girls from the Great River Kingdom in embroidery books. But you don't look like you can fight very well." Prince Longqing stared at the desolate girl, and used a lot of strength to calm his teeth that kept trembling because of anger. A stream of blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. It was as bright as the stamens of the peach blossoms. His black hair slowly fluttered on Prince Longqing's beautiful but pale face. His eyes were unusually focused and cold, and his hands that were exposed outside his black sleeves trembled slightly. The small crack on the peach blossoms had disappeared, and the divine sword that the hierarch had given to him at his waist began to gently buzz. Tang Xiaotang looked at him and scratched her head. She said, "Your state is very high, but you really can't fight. Your peach blossoms are very interesting, better than your sword. If you want to fight head-on with my scimitar, you have to use the sword on your hierarch's waist. If you abandon the peach blossoms and use the sword now, you will only die faster." Prince Longqing slowly wiped the blood stains from the corner of his mouth, and looked at her with a faint smile. He said, "I can try." Suddenly, a strange look appeared in Tang Xiaotang's clear eyes. It wasn't fear, nor was it excitement. Instead, it was as if she had sensed that something strange and vexing was approaching. "I don't have time to try today. I have something to do and have to go first." Tang Xiaotang looked at Prince Longqing and said, "But I have to remind you that this mountain belongs to my family. If I see people from the Divine Hall again, I will kill them one by one." Prince Longqing also sensed the aura that was rushing at a high speed from afar. He could not help but frown and felt extremely annoyed. He stared at Tang Xiaotang and said in a low voice, "Do you think you can leave today? For the third time, you said you can't fight." Tang Xiaotang looked at him and said sympathetically, "The disciples of the Enlightenment doctrine are best at running. Unless you enter the knowing destiny state, how can you catch up with me? Doesn't the Divine Hall teach these things now?" A very clear voice came from afar, "Tang Xiaotang, don't run if you can." Hearing that voice, Tang Xiaotang could not help but shiver. She replied angrily in a loud voice, "Yi Hongyu, you crazy woman. Don't be a hooligan if you can." Then she turned around and ran with the little white wolf. She ran faster than the wind. Please vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 251. Even if those devout Haotian believers were kowtowing around the Divine Hall and the Peach Mountain, there was always a direction. However, there was no treasure map in this story. There was no map in the bloody cloth. There was only the imperial court, which threw the heavy responsibility onto Ning Kei's shoulders and a completely irresponsible second brother. Thus, Ning Kei's trip to the wilderness became a tangled and frustrated journey in the end. In his view, if this journey was cultivation, then those guys who were warming themselves around the fire in the warm room of the imperial palace in Chang'an were all old men. It was so infuriating that he didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to say or how to walk. In the first few days after entering the north of Jianxi Mountain, Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan walked in silence and boredom. He perfectly played his hunting skills, but still couldn't overcome the difficulties brought by a night of strong north wind and heavy snowflakes. When they reached a mountain valley where the cold wind was especially strong, Ning Ke pretended not to see the frowning black eyebrows of the young talisman master and forced her to give another warm talisman. When he was about to move forward, he suddenly stopped and looked up. Mo Shanshan looked at his expression and thought that he probably saw some snow mountain sheep and couldn't help but want to shoot it for dinner. She couldn't help but gently shook her head. She just felt the warmth coming from her abdomen and didn't say anything. Ning Ke didn't take out his bow to hunt. Instead, he slowly frowned and sat down in the snow. He closed his eyes and released the psyche power from his sense of perception out of his body. He began to sit quietly and feel the aura of heaven and earth around him. The cold wind blew the snow over, and soon a thin layer of snow had accumulated on his clothes. Mo Shanshan looked at him and was a little worried and confused. She wanted to reach out and brush the snow off for him, but in the end, she did not move. Just at that moment, Ning Ke felt a familiar aura coming from the depths of Tianqi Mountain. With his current state, it was impossible for him to perceive things from such a long distance. However, that aura suddenly appeared in his sense of perception, which meant that it wasn't him who perceived that aura, but the aura in the depths of Tianqi Mountain ignored the thousands of miles of snow and took the initiative to find him. This analysis shocked him and made him speechless. He thought to himself, what kind of grand cultivator's state was that he could let me perceive his existence from such a long distance? Could it be the legendary limitless state? Could it be that there really was a sage-like existence in this vast mountain that surpassed the 5 states? In order to make sure that his perception was not wrong, he sat down without hesitation and began to close his eyes to meditate. With the concentration of his spiritual force and the release of the psyche power in his sense of perception, the breath coming from afar became clearer and clearer, like snowflakes in the wind crossing thousands of mountains, gently falling on his body, covering his clothes, and slowly and unstoppably seeping into his cheeks, mouth, and nose. An unimaginably terrifying aura of a powerhouse came from afar and instantly occupied one's sense of perception. In the face of such a situation, even a person like the Tao addict would have the first thought in his mind to avoid it. Ning Ke did not flee. Instead, he sat down and sensed quietly. Just as he had said before, this terrifying and powerful aura felt very familiar to him, even close to him. However, the problem was that no matter how hard he tried, he could not recall meeting a grand cultivator with such an aura in the past 2 years. The aura was strong but not overbearing. Although it was not overbearing, it was extraordinarily proud. It was like a cedar that lived stubbornly on the top of the snow-capped peak, covered with thousands of years of snow, but refused to bend its waist, overlooking all living beings under the peak and disdainfully looking at the sky. Ning Ke closed his eyes and quietly felt the smell in the aura. Suddenly, a bright light flashed, and a lot of pictures suddenly appeared in his sense of perception. They were the beautiful and calm meadow in front of the academy, the countless books in the old library that disdained to be understood by the world, the proud white goose feeding fish in the back mountain, the ancient crown on the head of second brother, the flower that 11th brother stared at in a daze, and the forest at the foot of the mountain of the academy that pointed straight to the sky like a sword. He slowly opened his eyes and looked into the distant mountains, feeling the calmness and persistence contained in the aura. He did not know why his heart ached and he almost shed tears, because the familiar aura had the master's pride and persistence, but there was no information. It found him only because it also felt that he had a very familiar smell. It did not want to continue to stay in this mountain, it wanted to return to the place it was most familiar with. It wanted to go home, to go back to the academy. When Ning Ke woke up, the wind and snow had stopped, and there was a very thick layer of snow on his body. He silently looked over there for a long time, understanding some things, and also determined some things. He suddenly asked, "Did you feel that aura?" Thick snowflakes rustled down along his clothes. Mo Shanshan had been silently guarding by his side, not knowing what had happened to him. Hearing his question, she slowly frowned and shook her head, saying, I didn't feel anything. Ning Kai stood up, patted off the snow on his clothes, and carried the heavy luggage, saying, let's go. Mo Shanshan asked, where to? Ning Kai pointed to the distant mountains where the strong and proud aura came from, and said, go there. Mo Shanshan said, we don't have a map. Ning Kai shook his head and said, the people in Chang and asked me to come here, because they know that I don't need a map. The snow road was difficult, but it was as difficult as climbing up to the sky. Ning Kai, who was determined, took the calligraphy addict, who had always been determined, and walked in that direction. It didn't take them too long to reach a steep cliff. It took them half a day to climb over the steep cliff. The two stood on the snow cliff, and a gust of wind blew against their faces. It was warm and cool, not like the cold winter wind, but like spring. The snow cliff was very long, and the two walked along it. After a while, they found the source of the spring wind. At the end of the snow cliff was a large and deep valley. It was not because of the geothermal heat or the hot spring, but because of a green broadleaf forest. The valley was not big, and it was full of green broadleaf trees. It was a sharp contrast with the cold white and black world on the snow cliff. Mo Shanshan was stunned by the greenery in front of her eyes. After a long silence, she subconsciously looked back at Ning Kai because this was the direction he had pointed. She could not understand how Ning Kai could know what kind of valley was in the depths of the Tianxi Mountains. At the very beginning, he had been so troubled because he did not have a map. Ning Kai's expression was not much calmer than hers. He stared blankly at the green valley and the faint spring in the depths of the valley. He felt that the familiar aura was becoming more and more condensed and real. He could not help but feel nervous. Because of that aura, he had been a little quiet these days. At this time, he finally confirmed that he was not wrong. After a sudden sharp tension, he became absolutely relaxed. Standing on the snow cliff, he suddenly shouted to the green valley, Zhang Wuji, where are you? Standing on the snow cliff, he suddenly shouted to the green valley, Zhang Wuji, where are you? Mo Shanshan looked at him expressionlessly. She was probably wondering what was up with this guy again. Ning Kai calmed himself down and said softly to her, I think we have found the front gate of the devil's doctrine. Mo Shanshan's expression turned cold as she frowned and said, it's that simple. Ning Kai looked at the valley below the snow cliff in silence. He shook his head and said, there are many seemingly difficult things in this world, but as long as you can understand the connections between them, they will become very simple. Mo Shanshan simply shook her head and said, I don't understand what you mean. Ning Kai looked at her and asked, do you know who found the front gate of the devil's doctrine and cut it into ruins with a single sword? Mo Shanshan continued to shake her head. Teacher didn't tell me. It seems like he doesn't want to talk about it. Ning Kai said, I don't know who he is either. I can roughly guess who he is, but I can be sure that he is related to me. Because of this relationship, it will be very easy for me to find the front gate of devil's doctrine. Hearing his words, Mo Shanshan's eyes gradually lit up. She could roughly guess who the senior he was talking about was. However, since he didn't say it out loud, she didn't continue. Prince Long Qing should also be in the mountain. She reminded him. Ning Kai shook his head and said, if the Divine Hall knew the location of the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, why didn't they come before the desolate men went south? According to my estimation, there shouldn't be anything good left in this valley. The Divine Hall sent Prince Long Qing and the others to the wilderness for the same reason as the academy. They just wanted us to cultivate. Mo Shanshan blinked her eyelashes slightly and said quietly, sometimes, cultivation is a matter between two people. Ning Kai didn't misunderstand her words. He understood what she meant. After a moment of silence, he said, if Long Qing had to defeat me to complete his Taoist heart, do you think I would give him such a chance? Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, in cultivation, there are many times when you are forced to do so. Ning Kai said very seriously, we are all righteous people. Why do we have to fight and kill each other when we meet? Besides, Tianqi Mountain is so big. How can we meet each other so easily? As soon as he finished speaking, a voice suddenly came from the snow cliff. That person's voice contained very complicated emotions. Some were surprised, some were perplexed, and some were determined. Finally, it all merged into calmness. I also didn't expect to meet you so soon. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan looked back and saw a person sitting on the snow cliff hundreds of feet away. Because of the different temperatures on both sides of the snow cliff, the right half of that person's body was covered with thick snow, while the left half of his body was black without any snow. It looked like he was sitting on the boundary between two worlds. One side was snowy, the other was spring, and the other was dark and the other was bright. It looked very strange. Along with the voice, the thick layer of snow covering that person's body slowly disintegrated and slid down. That perfect face, because of the wind and frost, appeared somewhat haggard and haggard. His usually clean and spotless black Taoist robe was also full of dirt. Especially the black hair that draped over his shoulders, it made him look even more miserable. But his expression was still calm and awe-inspiring, like the Son of God. The world was so big that when you grew up, you would hold great power and be famous all over the world. But when you wanted to find the little girl next door who gave you lollipops, you still couldn't find any news about her. But the world was also very small. Maybe when you ate a bowl of dirty stew and went to the toilet at the corner of the street, you would suddenly meet the shameless scum who fought with you for lollipops from the little girl next door. The Buddhism sect said that love leaves and hatred will meet. It was referring to the suffering of the human world. But all living things are suffering. So when we live in the human world, we often have to leave the people we love and then keep meeting the people we hate. After the mountain climbing test on the second floor of the academy, in the eyes of the bigwigs at the top of the secular world and in the eyes of the people in the cultivation world, Ning Ke and Prince Long Qing were destined to be lifelong enemies. And they really hated each other. So no matter how big the world was or how big the vast Tianqi Mountain was, they were bound to meet. Prince Long Qing looked at the man and woman on the other side of the snow cliff and suddenly laughed. He could hear his voice from thousands of feet away, so he could naturally see the man's face. How could he forget the man's tired and disgusting face? How could he forget the freckles on his face? How could he forget the feminine dimples on his face? How could he forget the time when he walked out of the thick fog on the back peak of the academy and handed him a flattened cake like an idiot? But he didn't expect that Ning Ke and the calligraphy addict could actually find this valley. Because logically speaking, only the Divine Hall had a map. And if it wasn't for the abnormal weather and the elimination of the big tactical array outside the valley, even the people in the Divine Hall wouldn't be able to find this place. When I came here a few days ago, this valley was still covered with ice and snow. There was no emotion in Prince Long Qing's voice. He said, "I'm sitting here, watching the ice and snow melt, watching the green leaves grow again, watching the difference between each day. It's like I'm watching a miracle, and I'm touched." He looked at Ning Ke on the other side of the snow cliff and continued calmly, "You're late, or early, because there's still some time before the gate opens." Ning Ke's warm and sincere voice sounded in the distance. "Your Highness, do you know when the gate opens?" Prince Long Qing was a little annoyed by the enthusiasm in his voice. He said in a low voice, "I don't know. But since you and I are both early, maybe we have time to do something else." Ning Ke didn't have Prince Long Qing's ability to talk regardless of the distance. He opened his palm and put it to his mouth. He shouted, "Play chess, play the zither, or talk nonsense. I'm very good at these things now. If you want to talk about fighting, then forget it. I can't beat you. It's not a big deal for you to bully me." Mo Shanshan stood beside him. Hearing this, she lowered her head and said nothing. His words were so shameless and frank that even the girl who secretly admired him couldn't bear it, let alone Prince Longqing. Prince Longqing looked at Ning Ke in the distance and took a deep breath. The night of climbing the mountain was the biggest setback he had ever suffered in his life. A few days ago, he was defeated by Tang Xiaotang, which made his frustration even more intense. Today, he finally saw Ning Quebec. The fire in his chest that had been buried in the ashes gradually burned, burning his body and Taoist heart. It was about to ignite his black Taoist robe. Then let this fire burn the heavens in one fell swoop, burn down the fence. Prince Longqing looked down at the fence made of branches and sawdust in front of him. He reached out and randomly pulled out a piece from the middle. Then he slowly put it on the snow and smiled. He took out a piece of firewood from the fence. Ning Ke didn't know what it meant, but Mo Shanshan did. She raised her head and looked at Prince Longqing on the other side of the snow cliff expressionlessly. She stretched out her hands from her thick cotton sleeves and casually pinched a few pieces of cold snow and talismans in the wind. With this action, the chi of heaven and earth between the snow cliff violently stirred. The heavy cotton robe on the girl talisman master magically became soft for some reason. It swayed gently with the mountain wind mixed with cold and heat, like a beautiful dress that didn't have any force. There seemed to be no change on the snow cliff. But only the powerhouses like Prince Longqing and Mo Shanshan could see that the fluffy snowflakes had become fluffier than before. Even the cliff stones under the snow had become soft. Silently, the power of talisman Taoism had been spread among them. Prince Longqing frowned slightly and quietly looked at the other side of the snow cliff. Then he found that the calligraphy addict was more powerful than the legend. He didn't know if she had seen the threshold, but she was already close to knowing Destiny's state. He looked at the other side and asked in a low voice, Ning Ke, do you only know how to hide behind a woman? Hearing this, Ning Ke quickly stood behind Mo Shanshan and slightly squatted down to make sure that the girl's body could completely cover him. Then he poked his head out and shouted with a smile, don't try to provoke me. I'm such a person. You can't beat me. Think of something else. These words were said without the slightest hint of shame. Prince Longqing couldn't imagine how a disciple of the headmaster of academy could be so shameless. So he became more gloomy and angry because he increasingly felt that he was qualified to be a disciple of the headmaster of academy. He was slightly angry and shouted in a low voice, do you think you can hide behind a woman for a lifetime? Ning Ke put his head on Mo Shanshan's shoulder and looked at the other side of the snow cliff. He said naturally, if I can't beat you, of course I have to hide. If I can beat you, I won't hide. I just hope that you won't learn from me then. Besides, although the possibility is not high, if I can't beat you in this lifetime. He said very seriously, I'll hide behind her for a lifetime. What can you do to me? The anger on Prince Longqing's face gradually disappeared and he became expressionless again. Ning Ke was not ashamed at all. He stared at his movements vigilantly and thought about what he should do later. Mo Shanshan's expression was a little complicated at this time. Her thin and long eyelashes gently blinked and her thin and red lips were tightly pressed together. The color of her lips was even more vivid than the color of the white snow and green valley. Hide behind me for a lifetime. For a lifetime. She slowly lowered her head. Her hands that were holding the fu paper trembled slightly. It was not because of nervousness, but because of something else. Well written. I finally feel good about myself. I'm strongly collecting the recommendation votes in your hands. Please support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 252. Prince Longqing stood up slowly. The snow fell from his black clothes and landed on his boots. He looked at the other side of the snow cliff and said slowly, you can hide behind the calligraphy addict for a lifetime. But the problem is whether she has the ability to protect you, and whether she is willing to do so. After saying this, he stepped over the low fence of firewood in front of him and walked along the snow cliff expressionlessly. The snow cliff was extremely narrow. It looked wider because of the snow. In fact, it could only accommodate a few people walking side by side. It was like a natural stone bridge in the sky, dividing the snowy foothills and the verdant valley into two parts. The side of the snow cliff facing the verdant valley was extremely steep. The gray rock wall was covered with some weeds, making it difficult to climb. There was no path, so it was very difficult to go down. In a short while, Prince Longqing had walked more than 1,000 feet. He looked at Mo Shanshan and said with a gentle expression, "Junior sister Shanshan, have you seen Qin Jia during this trial in the wilderness? She often mentioned you in the West Hill." Mo Shanshan had already woken up from her lost thoughts. She looked at him and bowed slightly. When she was about to say something, Ning Ke flashed out from behind her. He looked at Prince Longqing and said loudly, "Your Highness, you are the priest of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. I don't believe that you don't know what happened in the meadow and the palace. Isn't it a little too late to be friendly now?" Prince Longqing's face darkened slightly. He did know about the conflict between the calligraphy addict and his fiancée. But he was a proud person. The reason why he was so gentle to the calligraphy addict was because he respected her. How could it be like what Ning Ke said? Wasn't that almost like a villain? He looked at Ning Ke in the distance and suddenly frowned. He found that Ning Ke had made a lot of progress after a few months. He said, "You are about to enter the see-through state. It seems that the back of the mountain of the academy is really helpful to you." Ning Ke looked at him and said with a smile, "Your Highness is joking again. If it's not helpful, why did the two of us fight to the death that day and let those perverts in the back of the mountain watch?" Hearing the hidden mockery in his words, Prince Longqing did not get angry. He looked at him and said calmly, "We met in Chang'an, in the back of the mountain of the academy, and even in the depths of Tianqi mountain. Sometimes I have to believe in the words of the common people. Perhaps you and I are destined to be enemies for life." Ning Ke said, "I don't want this kind of fate." During the conversation, Prince Longqing's footsteps did not stop. He walked a little further towards the other end of the snow cliff. He looked at Ning Ke with a smile and suddenly said, "Haotian bestows thousands of lucky chances on the world. If they come to you, you can't get rid of them no matter whether you want them or not. Just like today, I will break into the knowing destiny state, and you will also break into the see-through state." I suddenly thought, why don't we make a bet on the date of breaking into the realm? If the headmaster of the academy knows that I gamble, how can I live? Ning Ke thought of the various kinds of tokens in Seventh Sister's room at the back of the mountain of the academy and said seriously, "And cultivation depends on the individual. Everyone has their own lucky chances. Why do we have to mix together?" Then he looked at Prince Longqing who was getting closer and said, "And why should I give you a chance to complete your Taoist heart? If we are destined to be enemies for life, then I won't do anything that might help you." The first sentence was a lie, and the second was a sincere statement. Prince Longqing was slightly startled. He did not expect this guy to be so honest. He could not help but smile and said, "Do you want me to try to humiliate you before you do it?" Ning Ke said seriously, "The Buddhism sect once said that one should wash one's face clean. If your Highness wants to humiliate me, please don't be shy." Prince Longqing was really startled. He looked at him silently for a long time and said, "Are you really a Tang?" Ning Ke replied, "Your Highness, you can see me as a yen." Then he was startled, shook his head and said with a smile, "I just found out today that the name Yen is not a nice name." Prince Longqing was a yen and was mocked as a eunuch, so he did not want to tolerate it anymore. He looked at Ning Ke coldly and said, "If you don't fight back, I can." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You don't want to fight back, but you still want to fight. Do you want to kill me?" Prince Longqing shook his head and said, I can defeat you. Ning Kei's expression became unprecedentedly serious. He quietly looked at the haggard but still handsome face of Prince Longqing. After a long silence, he said in a heavy tone, Your Highness, please don't try to defeat me, because I won't give you such a chance. If you touch a finger of mine, I will die in front of you. The snow cliff was very narrow. It seemed very long, but there would be a moment when they walked to the end. Prince Longqing and Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan stood opposite each other on the snow cliff. The wind and snow gradually rose. At this moment, Ning Kei said such a thing. If you don't buy me gemstones, I'll die for you to see. If you don't make me breakfast, I'll die for you to see. Such stories and scenes of quarrels were very common. The subject of the words, die for you to see, was usually, I'll die for you to see. This was because only shrews in the marketplace would use such extremely shameless means when they quarreled. However, Ning Kei said it like this. And because of his solemn expression and serious tone, his words did not sound like a shrew who beat her husband and scolded her neighbor in a rainy alley. Instead, he sounded quite calm and generous, like a child who picked up a yellowish leaf in the bleak wind and was about to hold a sword and go on a long journey. As for the emotions and choices between life and death, Ning Kei had done too many times in his life, so he was very calm. And because of his calmness, the word die that came out of his mouth was more powerful than anyone else's. The stubborn and powerful big black horse had been extremely arrogant in the horse farm all his life. However, when he heard Ning Kei say the word die in the meadow of the academy, he was so scared that his limbs went soft and he dared not have any disloyal thoughts from then on. Prince Longqing was a human being, so of course he could understand these words, I just don't want your Taoist heart to be complete. Defeating me and committing suicide were two different things. More importantly, he could hear the generosity and ruthlessness hidden in Ning Kei's calm words. If he forced himself to fight, Ning Kei would really dare to die in front of him and the world. He had seen many people in the judicial department who were not afraid of death and did not care about the lives of others. There were subordinates, remnants of the devil's doctrine, and those rebels. But he had never seen anyone who was so ruthless or did not care about himself. Mo Shanshan also understood Ning Kei's words. Her cheeks wrapped in a scarf looked slightly pale. Ning Kei looked at Prince Longqing and said, The Academy and the Divine Hall hate each other, but I think they are not interested in fighting. But if I die here today, things will become very troublesome. I have to remind you that the Yen Kingdom is too weak, and my second brother has always been unreasonable. Prince Longqing looked at his face and frowned slightly. He said, You are either hiding behind a woman or hiding behind a mountain school. I am beginning to doubt whether you are a Tang or a man. I have said that this kind of verbal attack has no effect on me. Ning Kei looked at him and answered seriously, and in this world, except for a few people, who doesn't hide behind a mountain school. If you are expelled from the Peach Mountain by the Divine Hall today, the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine who have made enemies with you over the years, or those who usually do not dare to provoke you, will all want to bite you. Can you bear it? Prince Longqing looked at him in silence. He suddenly realized that although this guy was young, he could see through the world so clearly, or perhaps gloomily, without the usual hot-bloodedness of young people. Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Kei's back and also fell into silence. She had quietly listened to the conversation for such a long time, and naturally thought of the lesson Ning Kei had given her in the carriage on the journey to the palace. What if I can't beat him? Run. What if two tigers meet? Pretend to be hurt and beg for mercy, saying that I have loved you silently for 10,000 years, and do everything to weaken his will. Beat his mother, kill his family, slap his son, and do everything to provoke him and make him lose his mind. If you wear shoes, you go to the thorny land, if you wear thick clothes, you choose the cold land, today, seeing Ning Kei's response, she finally understood that these seemingly ridiculous words hid the absolute determination to create or wait for victory by any means necessary, regardless of reputation or dignity. To sum up such thoughts, that person must have experienced many trials of life and death and humiliation in his life. Prince Longqing looked at Ning Kei's face and suddenly laughed. His black hair scattered on his shoulders gently swayed with the snowy wind, as if it was about to float away. However, the words that came slowly from his thin lips were not the least bit out of this world. Today, your response seemed shameless, but you have great forbearance and a strong will. Those who know you can't wait to drink 3,000 cups with you, but I know that you can't drink. Speaking of which, I still can't forget your little handmaiden who likes to drink. If you agree, I am willing to exchange 3 cities in the west of Yan Kingdom for her. In the future, it will be good to have a drinking companion. Suddenly, the West Hill Divine Sun mentioned Sang Sang far away in Changpan. Of course, it was not because he really had feelings for her, but a valiant attempt to remove the fence of his Taoist heart. Ning Kei slightly tilted his head and looked at him carefully, without a trace of emotion in his eyes. He was thinking about who in Changpan could make him think that Sang Sang was worth testing. Then he smiled and said, "The one in my family is not worth much, but I won't exchange her even if she is beautiful." Prince Longqing slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said, "You won't exchange her even if she is beautiful. It seems that this little handmaiden is really important to you." Mo Shanshan's thin and dark eyebrows slowly furrowed. She looked at Prince Longqing, who was not far away from her. She could hear the hidden threat in his words and his determination to anger Ning Quebec. Then she felt some subtle changes in Ning Kei's posture. It seemed that he only slightly straightened his shoulders, but all the previous unscrupulous means disappeared. What was left was only a stubborn young man in the wind and snow. She knew that Prince Longqing had finally grasped Ning Kei's vital point. She could not help but slightly lower her eyes and quickly entered the absolute state of mind of Ming Ning. The fu paper between her fingers began to tremble even though there was no wind. Ning Kei suddenly said, "I have a horse." The wind and snow on the snow cliff suddenly stopped, and it was quiet. A dark horse. Ning Kei straightened his body and looked at Prince Longqing calmly. He continued, "Your fiancée Princess Qinjia also has a horse. A white horse. No matter if it is a dark horse or a white horse, a stallion or a mare, whoever can ride on the other is a good horse." Hearing this, Prince Longqing's face suddenly darkened. He took another step forward, and the snow on the cliff rose from the ground, as if it began to roll up a snowstorm from the ground to the sky. Mo Shanshan slowly raised her head and looked at Prince Longqing who was gradually approaching. She thought of the last words that Ning Kei had said in the carriage. A cold wind blew on her face, and her face was cold and beautiful. Prince Longqing looked at her expressionlessly and said, "Does Mo Qi really want to fight against the Divine Hall? But I am really curious about the state that the calligraphy addict's half-divine talisman has reached. Did I say that I want to fight with you? Did I say that she wants to fight with you?" Ning Kei suddenly raised his right arm and pointed at his face. He said, "In the palace, my dark horse defeated your white horse. I also want to see if I can defeat you. So I accept your first bet." Mo Shanshan looked at his profile in confusion. She thought, "You didn't agree before, why did you agree now?" Prince Longqing didn't want to agree, but he saw a brocade bag hanging on his wrist when Ning Kei pointed at it. The brocade bag was silver blue and embroidered with simple flowers. It looked very ordinary as it swayed gently in the wind and snow. But Prince Longqing knew that the brocade bag was not ordinary. He felt the strong aura coming from it, so he decided to wait and see what Ning Kei wanted to say. A complete divine talisman was qualified to make anyone wait for a moment, no matter when, where or what situation it was. He said expressionlessly, "Say it." Ning Kei said, "Let's make a bet on the date of breaking the realm. The first one to break the realm will be the winner, and the loser will destroy his snow mountain and ocean of chi. If I win, I will leave the academy, and you will leave the divine hall. It was a very ordinary tone, but the content of the bet was very unusual. If the cultivator's snow mountain and ocean of chi were destroyed, he would be a useless person. Especially the supplementary conditions, it was like pulling out his tendons and peeling off his bones. It was extremely cruel. He was gambling with the two most precious things of a cultivator. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "This bet is to your advantage, because you need to get rid of me, the obstacle in your heart. But you have never been an obstacle to my cultivation. But you don't need to thank me. Because in the beginning, I wanted to kill you, but I didn't want to take the risk. Now I'm just giving myself a chance to kill you." Prince Long Qing looked at him quietly, and suddenly laughed against the wind and snow on the cliff. On the snow cliff, a big bet began. In the name of Haotian. In the name of the headmaster of the academy. Ning Ke looked at Prince Long Qing and said with a smile, "I hope you are well the next time we meet." Then his smile gradually faded, and he said slowly and firmly, "If you are well, then I am a fool." After saying this, he jumped off the snow cliff with Mo Shanshan, and jumped into the green valley. After a moment, a black flower suddenly grew between the steep rock walls, and the falling speed suddenly decreased. Prince Long Qing walked to the edge of the snow cliff and looked down the rock wall. He silently thought of the divine talisman in the bag, which was obviously made by Uncle Yen Sei, and felt a sense of loss. Ning Ke's state was not good, and his character was terrible. But he was still a world wayfarer. Although he was the West Hill Divine Son, he could not kill him at will, unless he really did not care about provoking a war between the Academy and the Divine Hall. Fortunately, he had tried his best to force Ning Ke into a desperate situation with the bet, and the Academy could not say anything after that. Thinking that he could finally remove the firewood in his heart, he calmed down and walked slowly back along the snow cliff. He sat cross-legged behind the firewood fence, meditating in the wind and snow, and gradually became a snowman, waiting for the day to break the realm. It's a little late. Sorry, this chapter is too hard to write. No matter how stupid the party of reason is, it can't survive in this world. This chapter has been changed several times, not to change the details, but to change the plot, which I rarely do. At 12:00, I was still discussing with someone about what was right and what was wrong in the plot. So, I decided to kill the remaining moral integrity and the remaining party of reason from tomorrow onwards. Everything is based on looking good and feeling good. Everything is based on making myself feel good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 253. The steep cliff was rising rapidly in front of them. The weeds between the cliff crevices were dragged into a green line and then disappeared quickly. Mo Shanshan held Ning Ke's belt tightly with her left hand as the chilly wind blew against her cheeks. There was no panic in her eyes, nor did she cry out, because she believed that a person like Ning Ke would never commit suicide. With a bang, the big black umbrella opened in the air. Their bodies shook heavily and the speed of their fall slowed down. They left the cliff with the wind and floated toward the broad-leaved forest not far away. Her eyes squinted because of the wind. She raised her head and saw that the huge black umbrella covered the snowy sky. Even when the strong mountain wind blew, it only slightly deformed. There were no signs of it collapsing. She couldn't help but be curious. What material was this black umbrella made of? How could it be so sturdy? Ning Ke held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly with his right hand and held the calligraphy addict's waist with his left hand. He stared at the ground that was getting closer and closer, and did not pay attention to the warm and smooth feeling between his fingers. He had jumped off the cliff many times with the little girl in his arms. He knew that although the black umbrella was strong, the surface area was too small and it would not feel good when they landed. When they were still several feet away from the ground, a very light and pure talisman intent was released from Mo Shanshan's fingers. The air suddenly seemed to become a little sticky, and the speed of their fall slowed down again. Ning Ke knew that Mo Shanshan had made a move, so he stopped preparing to use the talisman and held her waist tightly. With a muffled sound, he bent his knees slightly and landed heavily on the ground outside the forest. His bones and muscles instantly tightened and loosened the moment he landed, perfectly neutralizing most of the impact. The girl in his arms seemed to not notice anything at all. Ning Ke loosened his arms and nodded to her. Mo Shanshan shook her head and calmly left his arms. The ground outside the forest was covered with countless fallen leaves, which were soft when stepped on. It was unknown how many years the leaves had accumulated to such a thick layer. But the amazing thing was that there was no smell of decay. Although this forest was a broad-leaved forest, it had only just seen the light of day. The green leaves between the branches were plucked out, unable to hide the starry snowflakes that seeped through the snow cliff, making them look like stars of green. The two walked into the green forest and disappeared in a moment. They walked into the green forest and gradually moved away from the snow cliff. There were no more snowflakes from the world outside the mountain. However, the sky above the valley was still gray, contrasting with the green in the forest, making it look even colder. Ning Ke did not know whether it was because of the pressure brought by the promise of breaking the realm, or because Prince Longqing mentioned Sang Sang who was far away in Chang'an, but he was very quiet after entering the forest. He was not as active as he used to be, but just walked in silence. Mo Shanshan was also very silent. She looked at his back and thought of the previous conversation on the snow cliff. She thought of the little handmaiden whom Ning Ke had protected against his own will. She thought of the bet that was not bloody but extremely cruel. She felt sad and worried for a while. She stepped on the fallen leaves in the forest silently and did not make any sound. Looking from the top of the snow cliff, this verdant valley was not very big. But when they actually arrived, they discovered that this valley did not look very wide, but it was actually very deep. The two of them walked silently in the forest for almost half a day, but they still had not reached the end of the valley. This place was far enough from the snow cliff, so they did not need to worry about being heard or chased by Prince Longqing. Mo Shanshan looked at the big black umbrella behind Ning Ke and finally could not suppress the doubts in her heart. She asked, "Why didn't you fight before?" Ning Ke stopped and looked back at her. He asked, "Why?" Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and said seriously, "When you taught me how to fight in the carriage, you once said that when two tigers meet, the most important thing to remember is that, the brave one wins." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke replied, "In front of Longqing, I am not a tiger." Mo Shanshan glanced at the brocade bag hanging on his wrist and said, "With the divine talisman in hand, even a child can become a tiger." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Master has spent too much time and energy to write the divine talisman that can be used by people in the no-doubt state. As his disciple, I can't abuse it. Besides, you and I are both masters of talisman Taoism. We should be very clear that this kind of stimulating talisman is not made by ourselves. It is difficult for a talisman master to release the real talisman power in it. I am not sure that I can hurt Longqing with this talisman." Mo Shanshan slightly raised her small face and looked at him seriously. She said, "And me?" Ning Ke said sincerely, "Thank you. But this is between me and Longqing. There is no reason for you to take risks. What's more, you came here under the edict of the Divine Hall. I can't let you fall out with the Divine Hall for me." He looked at the cliff vaguely seen outside the green forest and said, "The purpose of entering the mountain is for the tomes of arcane. In the end, I will still face to face with Prince Longqing. He wants to force me into a desperate situation where I can't retreat. I also have the same idea. It will be good for the later things if I can get rid of him in advance." Mo Shanshan slightly frowned and said, Prince Long Qing is not so easy to get rid of. Ning Ke said, in the past, it was not easy to get rid of him. But now with the promise of breaking the realm, the situation is completely different. As long as I can break the realm before him, then he will be killed. He spoke slowly and calmly, as if he was talking about a matter of course. Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly realized that he seemed to have never thought that he would lose this bet. He also did not think that even if he won, what if the other party went back on his words? Although the divine son of West Hill was a devout believer of Haotian, if he really wanted to destroy his cultivation and leave the divine hall, the oath made in the name of Haotian might not really be binding. She asked, what if you lose this bet? Ning Ke simply answered, I will not lose. Mo Shanshan did not hesitate to ask, if. Ning Ke was slightly startled and said, if I lose, then I lose. I have gone through a lot of hardships to clear the acupoints. Would I really be so stupid to fulfill the bet and become a useless person again? Mo Shanshan could not believe her ears and asked, then what about the headmaster's reputation? Ning Ke thought of Lin Ling, the Psyche master who died in the Tang camp of the palace and laughed. I have not seen the headmaster, but according to the senior brothers and sisters, he should not care. On the contrary, if I really choose to become a useless person after losing the bet and then leave the academy pitifully, he may be very angry at himself for taking in such a stupid student. Mo Shanshan still could not understand this sentence. Ning Ke explained, this sentence means that the headmaster does not care about his reputation. What if Prince Long Qing loses to you and goes back on his words? If I enter the see-through realm first, he will have to fulfill the promise. It is not so easy to challenge someone in a higher state. You have entered the see-through state, but you are only at the lower level. How can you surpass 2 states and win? No matter how good you are at fighting, the gap between the states is still too big. Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly asked seriously, if the breakthrough is suddenly disturbed by the outside world at the most critical moment, what will happen? Mo Shanshan did not know why he was concerned about this. After thinking for a moment, she said, it depends on what kind of outside interference it is. Ning Ke said, the most direct and strong kind. Mo Shanshan said, the breakthrough will suffer a severe backfire, and it is even possible that it will be impossible for him to break the realm in this life. Ning Ke nodded and said, that would be the best. Then the two fell into silence again. Ning Ke seemed to be walking silently and aimlessly, but in fact, he had been following a certain direction. The strong and proud aura was like a bright lamp between heaven and earth, guiding him through the green forest, through a swamp, and then through a muddy, rugged, wet and misty mountain road, and finally came to a lake. The lake was not large, with a radius of less than 1,000 feet. The lake bank was winding, and the water rippled gently. It was unknown how long this strange valley had existed, and there was no trace of artificial carving. The verdant valley was warmer than the snow-capped peak of Tianxi Mountain outside, but in fact, it was still a little cold. It was more like the winter in Chang'an City. The surface of the lake bank was covered with extremely thin ice, which automatically dispersed when the water rippled, and gradually condensed on the quieter surface in the distance. There seemed to be no artificial traces, and it was a natural lake in the valley. But Ning Ke did not think so, because the strong and familiar aura came from the depths of the lake. He stood by the lake and stared at the lake for a long time. Through the clear water, he saw the white sand and round stones at the bottom, but he did not see anything unusual. Mo Shanshan couldn't sense the strong aura, but she could clearly sense the existence of other things. She walked to Ning Ke's side and looked at the fish swimming slowly in the lake. She said softly, "This lake is a big tactical array. It's strange that the lake itself is the eye of the array, which seems to violate the principles of tactical arrays." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "The tactical array of the unknown place is naturally a little different from ordinary tactical arrays." "You mean this lake is the front gate of the devil's doctrine?" She looked at the reflection of the snow-capped peak in the distance, and suddenly remembered some records in the scriptures. She said in a trembling voice, "It was recorded in the scriptures that there is a lake in the front gate of the devil's doctrine. Is it this lake?" Ning Ke said, "It should be right." Mo Shanshan looked at the ordinary lake in front of her, and could not believe that she found the front gate of the devil's doctrine so easily. She said, "I really did not expect that I would have the opportunity to see the remains of the front gate of the devil's doctrine in my life. If it were other cultivators, they would be very excited to see the front gate of the devil's doctrine that had been destroyed in time, and to see the legendary unknown place. They would even jump into the lake in excitement. If it were any other time, Ning Ke might also be so excited, but now he was very calm, because whether the Hming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane was hidden at the bottom of the lake or the relics of the predecessor in the sect, it had nothing to do with him for the time being. He suddenly asked, "Does this lake have a name? Is it mentioned in the West Hill scriptures?" Mo Shanshan asked, "Why do you care about this?" Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "In the future, the history books will record that Ning Ke, the 13th disciple of the second floor of the academy, broke through the see-through realm by this lake. How can this lake not have a name? Neither the nameless lake nor the unnamed lake sounds good." Mo Shanshan sighed, thinking that breaking through the realm was so difficult and mysterious. How could it be broken through so easily? His words were a little too arrogant, so she said helplessly, "The devil's doctrine calls themselves the Enlightenment sect, so they call this lake Daming Lake." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 254. The verdant valley seemed to be a foreign land isolated from the world. The lake water reflected the high snow-capped peak. The Tianqi mountain outside the valley was windy and snowy, and the temperature dropped day by day. But it was still relatively warm here, which was very strange. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan did not find the existence of hot springs or geothermal heat, so they could only attribute this unusual phenomenon to the function of the tactical array. They could not help feeling shocked that a big tactical array could cover the sky and the earth against the season. They were even more certain that the front gate of the devil's doctrine, which had not appeared for decades, was in the lake in front of them. According to Prince Longqing, it was not yet time for the mountain gate to open. The two of them did not know when it would open. Thinking that there would be a strange phenomenon, they could only wait quietly and do what they had to do at the same time. Ning Ke walked to a big stone by the lake and sat down. He looked at the strange scaleless fish swimming in the clear lake water. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "How can I break the realm?" This was a very direct question, and also a very stupid one. It was a question that all the grand cultivators in the world could not answer. Because on the long road of cultivation, passers-by saw different scenery along the way. How could there be a ready-made answer? If breaking the realm could be answered, then the headmaster of the academy must be the best person to answer this question. Didn't it mean that the senior brothers and sisters on the second floor of the academy should have broken the 5 states long ago? Ning Ke was very clear that he would inevitably encounter mountains one after another on the road of cultivation. He had long been aware of this and waited calmly. However, he had been standing outside the Dongxian gate for several months without any progress. Now because of the bet with Prince Longqing, he suddenly had a very heavy time pressure, so he subconsciously asked. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said softly, "This kind of question can only be answered by you." Ning Ke put his hand into the slightly cold lake water and scared away a few fish. After thinking for a moment, he said, "I think the most important thing is that you must have the desire to break the realm. If you don't even think about it, the threshold will definitely be higher. Then you must have confidence. You must believe that you can break the realm." As for cultivation, his experience was somewhat unusual. Thanks to the vermilion bird black umbrella and the precious pill from the unknown place, he did not encounter any threshold at all. Inexplicably, he directly and inexplicably went from the initial enlightenment to the perception and then to the no-doubt state, and past the most difficult point of virtual and real. However, in the summer, he once entered into talisman Taoism by observing the rain, so he had some experience. Now looking at the threshold of the see-through realm, his desire to break the realm was very strong. The great pressure brought to him by Prince Long Qing in time had all turned into motivation. At this moment, how could he still care about the state of mind? However, when he looked at the fish swimming freely in the distance in the clear lake water, at the fish nearby that were still a bit nervous after being scared away by him, he knew very well what he lacked the most right now. Previously, when he said to Mo Shanshan that he would not lose, and the following two sentences about the Daming Lake, he seemed to be full of confidence. But in fact, that was just to strengthen his confidence, not to say that he already had the confidence. Facing the West Hill Divine Son who had stood outside the knowing destiny threshold for many years, how could he really have the confidence? What's more, breaking the realm was too mysterious. It was like the wind and snow in the wilderness, it came without saying. Even if it was a blue sky with the scorching sun overhead, a gust of wind might cause snowflakes to fall. Even if it was not said to come, it really wouldn't. Even if the sky was full of lead clouds and the water was bitterly cold, it might still not snow for several months. Mo Shanshan walked to the stone and followed his gaze to the lake. She said, "You don't have the confidence. I always thought that I was a genius. It seemed that there was nothing I couldn't learn. Even though I later found that I didn't have the aptitude for cultivation, I still felt that I was much more vigorous than others. Do you know? Last year, I was still thinking about how to kill a powerhouse in the see-through realm with 3 knives. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, later on, it was smooth sailing on the road of cultivation, including talisman Taoism. My master and many people thought that I was a genius. However, my confidence became weaker because I saw many real geniuses in cultivation, including you." Mo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly. She didn't know what to say. Eldest brother and second brother were the real cultivation geniuses. Chen Pipi, who was about the same age as her but had already entered the knowing destiny state, was the real genius. Compared with these geniuses, what was the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu? What was Prince Long Qing? What was she? What's more, there was the unknown place. When I thought that the world wayfarers coming from there were all grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, I felt uncomfortable all over and felt that it was too boring. Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him seriously. She said, "Then how can I make you more confident?" Ning Ke said seriously, "I need praise." Even if the calligraphy addict blushed even more, she really couldn't praise him in front of him. However, at this time, she finally confirmed that the guy in front of her really didn't know anything, so she chose another way. She looked at Ning Ke and sighed. "Do you know what the unknown place is in the world?" Ning Ke wiped the water on his hands on his chest and laughed. "Since it is the unknown place, how can I know?" She shook her head and said, "The unknown place consists of an abbey, a temple, a gate, and the second floor. The abbey is the Jishou Abbey, the temple is the Xiankong Temple, the gate is the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and the second floor is naturally the second floor of the Academy." Ning Ke stared at her face and was completely shocked and speechless. After a long time, he suppressed the chaotic emotions in his mind and shouted with a trace of embarrassment and anger, "Last time you told me that it was a mysterious place outside the secular world. Few people can see these places with their own eyes. Even those who have been there won't talk about it after coming out. That's why it is called the unknown place. But the Academy is in the south of Chang'an City. Everyone knows where it is, so how can it be unknown? The second floor of the Academy rarely appears in the world. Of course, compared to the Jishou Abbey in the mountains and the Xiankong Temple in the wilderness, it is indeed in the secular world. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, "There is a saying in the world that the joys and sorrows of the secular world and the outside world are never connected. If they can connect, they will be sages." She probably thought of the Sai that her teacher had once revealed and the legend of that person in the cultivation world. She looked slightly serious and continued, "If they can connect, they will be sages." Although the elder of the Lank Temple once said that the headmaster of the academy would never admit that he is a sage, the second floor of the academy is of course the land of sages. She stared into his eyes and continued, "You come from the second floor of the academy, the only land of sages in the world. Then no one is qualified to affect your confidence. Why are you not confident?" Ning Ke said in disbelief, "According to what you said, I am the legendary world wayfarer." Mo Shanshan looked at him and nodded. Then she frowned and added seriously, "Of course, the legendary world wayfarers are not as weak as you." Ning Ke, who was hurt by the simple girl again, did not refute this time because he had not completely gotten rid of the shock and shame. He thought of the arrogant words that he had said to the world wayfarer and realized that he had been scolded. He thought of the time when he and Sang Sang went to the west city of Chang and to win money from the gambling house and won it from him. He could not help but feel ashamed that he had stepped into two stinky gutters. The second floor of the academy was the unknown place, and he was a world wayfarer. It would make sense if the world wayfarers of the academy in the past were as strong and powerful as second brother. However, the arrogant man who carried the gavel and those mysterious senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain did not look like otherworldly sublime beings at all. Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked, "Do you still have confidence after knowing these things?" Ning Ke woke up and said happily, "I am the world wayfarer of the academy. I am much stronger than Prince Long Qing, the divine son of West Hill, in terms of background, temperament, and style. Why don't I have the confidence to trample him to death?" Mo Shanshan did not expect that his confidence came from this. She could not help but fall silent. After a moment, she said softly, "When breaking the realm, you need not only desire and confidence, but also opportunity. When I was 14, I received a volume of scripture written by my teacher and understood the mystery of heaven and earth after reading it for half a night. I hope you can find your opportunity as soon as possible." Ning Ke thought of what Master Huang Yang had taught him in the Wanyan Tower and nodded. However, opportunity was something that could only be found by chance. Just like the rain in summer, if it had fallen earlier or later, he might not have known it. Just like the lake water overflowing the willow embankment, the lake water must be full. However, if it wanted to overflow the long embankment without spreading into a flood, it needed other reasons. Ning Ke was neither a typical Tang nor a typical cultivator. He was not good at sitting and discussing Tao or understanding Tao. His cultivation, like his survival, was always full of perseverance and ruthlessness. It was the same since he was a child when he meditated hard. It was the same after he entered the academy and entered the old library. Later, he understood that life was like a problem and all kinds of infatuation. He was still used to solving problems to cultivate, but it was no longer that hard. Looking at the looming threshold of see-through at the bottom of the clear lake, he started his cultivation again. If he did not know how to break it, then he would see through it. He looked at the lake, the twilight haze, and the reflected stars in the night sky. He broke a willow branch and found a fish hook from his luggage. He hung a few pieces of dried meat given by the desolate women on it and hung it into the calm lake. It disturbed the stars and woke up the fish swimming under the lake rocks. Then he started fishing. The willow branch by the Daming Lake was extremely tough and suitable for fishing, perhaps because it had been tempered for thousands of years by the aura of heaven and earth drawn by the front gate tactical array of the Devil's Doctrine. The willow branch by the Daming Lake rose and fell. After a while, some fish swallowed the bait and were hooked. He did not pick up the rod, but just quietly held the willow branch, as if holding the most important thing in his life. The fish forcibly broke free from the hook and ran away in panic, splashing the water with a very light blood color. The willow branch had no bait or hook and was quietly hanging in the water. Ning Ke just sat on the rocks by the lake for the whole night. For him at this time, the fish in the lake were like the opportunity he needed to break the realm. Those who were willing to take the bait, and those who were unwilling, he would not force them. I caught a cold yesterday. It's not serious, but my mouth is very bitter and I feel a little dizzy. Fortunately, tomorrow is Saturday and I can rest. Don't rush to vote for the monthly vote. Anyway, we are all together. Let's wait for those guys to surpass us first. Then we will overtake them from behind and pass them all together. That will be fun, Have a good weekend, see you the day after tomorrow. In addition, I also need praise, to be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 255. Mo Shanshan had been looking at the lake. She was the best talisman master of the young generation. Before Ning Ke appeared, she had been the successor of the divine talisman master. As Master Yen Sei said, the tactical array was the big talisman. The best talisman master was undoubtedly the best tactical array master. She looked at the lake and wanted to see through the magic tactical array of the Daming Lake. She stood by the lake and looked at it carefully for a whole night. Finally, she roughly guessed the origin of this verdant valley. There was a big tactical array in the depths of the clear lake. Its specific function was unknown, but it was enough to block the sight and even the perception of psyche power. There should be a more powerful tactical array above the valley, which was enough to block the influence of nature. According to her analysis, it was extremely cold this year. The cold wave between heaven and earth came from the north. The outer tactical array shrouding the valley was broken from time to time. The plants in the valley, which were locked by the big tactical array, regained their vitality. Greenery spread out, and then there was a verdant scene in front of them. This could also confirm what Prince Long Qing said on the snow cliff. However, since the big tactical array in the valley was broken, greenery reappeared, and the cold air from the natural world poured in. The spring in the valley had not yet fully flourished, and it would fade because of the chill. That was why the thin ice on the lake was formed. Mo Shanshan sat quietly by the lakeside. Her hands, which rested on her knees, moved slowly and silently as she calculated. No matter how she calculated, she could not figure out under what circumstances the formation in the depths of the lake would be activated. Could it be that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine will only be reopened when the lake is completely frozen, or when a certain pivot is triggered and the lake is emptied, causing the pivot to lose its effectiveness? She frowned slightly and looked at the calm surface of the lake that was illuminated by the starry night. She couldn't make up her mind. The more she studied this formation, the more she could feel the wisdom and great power contained in it. She couldn't help but feel a strong sense of reverence for the Devil's Doctrine and the seniors who had set up this formation. As the morning light came, Mo Shanshan slowly opened her eyes and woke up from the empty state of mind. She turned around and saw Ning Ke still sitting on the stone by the lake, fishing. It was funny that his eyes were closed. Obviously, he had followed her. His head nodded up and down with the lake, as if he was fishing with his head. Perhaps feeling her gaze, Ning Ke woke up. He rubbed his eyes and his belly. Looking at the girl who was looking at him, he asked, "Hungry?" Mo Shanshan nodded gently. Looking at the reflection in the lake in front of her, she whispered, "I'll do it right away." The reflection of the two people in the lake was very clear, and they seemed to be closer. Ning Ke asked, "I'm really tired of eating jerky. Can I change my diet?" Mo Shanshan looked at the willow branch in his hand and asked curiously, "Did you catch any fish?" Ning Ke answered with a smile, "The hook was bitten away by that guy. How could I catch it?" Mo Shanshan stood up, her cotton dress fluttering in the morning breeze. She slowly stretched her right hand out of her sleeve. With a slight wave of cold talisman aura, a block of ice suddenly appeared in the middle of the lake. In the almost transparent ice block, there was an extremely fat scaleless fish. It looked as beautiful as icy amber, gently rippling with the water. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke sincerely sighed with emotion. Junior sister, you should have reached the state of perfection in the application of talisman Taoism. I don't know when I can also reach this level. Once you enter the see-through state, you will know that this method is not mysterious. Mo Shanshan said calmly, but she was thinking about something else. The talisman master, who regarded talisman Taoist master as sacred, thought, if you don't want to eat something fresh, if you don't put warm talismans on my body, if you don't know that you are at the critical moment of breaking the realm, how could I do such a thing? Ning Ke picked up the beautiful amber ice from the lake. Looking at the jade-like ice under the morning light and the fat fish which was still alive, he suddenly remembered the picture of the knowing destiny state that Chen Pipi showed him in the wetland of the academy. At that time, the state of the fish in the lake was even more magical. I'm going to pick some wild vegetables and make a pot of fish soup, he said happily. Mo Shanshan shook her head and said that she would do it herself. She thought, I even used the talisman ice fish to help you break the realm. How could I care about making a pot of fish soup for you? Ning Ke tilted his head to look at the girl's busy figure and her busy life of collecting firewood. He could not help but scratch his head. He had never thought that one day the calligraphy addict would serve him. However, he had gotten used to being served by Sang Sang in recent years, so he did not find it unacceptable. It didn't take long for the fish soup to be ready. Ning Ke inserted the willow branch fishing rod into the stone crevice by the lakeside and took out some salt from his luggage. He swirled it in a pot and scooped a bowl of milky white fish soup to drink. His luggage was as heavy as a hill. In fact, it was a hill with everything in it. Mo Shanshan raised her arm and wiped the firewood ash on her beautiful round face with her sleeve. She looked at him with her bright eyes full of expectation and nervousness and asked, "How is it?" It was a great enjoyment to drink a bowl of warm fish soup after such a long time in the ice and snow. Ning Ke smiled and praised it. Then he said, "It's a pity that I didn't bring any seasoning. Otherwise it would be better." It was a casual sentence, mainly a compliment. But it was the first time in her life that the calligraphy addict cooked alone, and there were some other meanings in it. So she was not very happy after hearing it. She held the bowl of fish soup with her head down and gently blew the foam and steam on it. Her long eyelashes slightly blinked. After a while, she asked softly, "Is it worse than what you usually eat?" "It's in the wilderness. How can I make delicious food?" Ning Ke drank up the soup in the bowl and began to eat the fish. He said vaguely, "The one in my family has never made any good food in her life. It always tastes the same. I'm tired of it." Mo Shanshan keenly noticed that he said, "the one in my family," instead of, "the little handmaiden in my family." So she became more silent. After a while, she raised her head firmly and looked at him seriously. She said, "I'll make it better and better." After drinking the fish soup and eating the dry food, Ning Ke continued to sit on the rock by the lake and fish. The willow branch in his hand had already turned white from being soaked in the lake water. There was no hook or bait on the branch. Other than some naughty fish that would occasionally touch it, no other fish showed any interest in it. Mo Shanshan spread out the book and began to write not far from him. The light from the winter sun in the sky was warm and beautiful when it was reflected into the green valley by the snow-capped peaks around the Daming Lake. When Ning Ke was bored fishing, he would occasionally leave the big stone by the lake and come to the girl's side to watch her write. After a few comments, he would pick up the brush and write a few words himself. They could compare and appreciate each other. Both of them were calligraphers, so they could endure loneliness the most. In this uninhabited green valley, the two of them wrote, appreciated the words, and looked at the lake. Time flew slowly, and there was nothing special. Of course, most of the time, Ning Ke still sat by the lake and fished. The big array outside the green valley that went against nature had completely disappeared. The cold air of the world and the warm spring in the valley met and resisted each other. It happened to be the time when spring was at its strongest. The broad-leaved forest by the lake magically grew countless green leaves in a very short period of time, swaying in the wind pleasantly. Ning Ke held the willow branch in his hand and fell asleep unknowingly. Suddenly, he woke up with a start. He looked up and found that there was no beautiful and peaceful Daming Lake in front of him. There was no trace of Mo Shanshan beside him, only desolation. He came to the wilderness again, the wilderness that only appeared in his dream and never seen with his own eyes. Today, there were no corpses on the ground, no tragic scene of blood soaking the ground, no people looking up at the sky in fear, no indifferent butcher and drunkard, and no tall figure. There was only cold and dry air, barren and dark wilderness, and faint cawing of black crows in the distance. Ning Ke rubbed his eyes and looked toward the place where the crows were cawing, but he did not see the sky full of black wings. He only saw 3 black smoke stably floating in front of the wilderness, looking at this direction indifferently, as if they were alive. He remembered a dream he once had, the dream during his journey. In that dream, he once saw a similar scene, and someone beside him said, "It's getting dark. It's getting dark." Looking at the 3 streaks of black smoke in the distance, Ning Ke suddenly felt a chill run through his body. Frost gradually appeared on his eyelashes and his clothes became thin and brittle. That was because he clearly saw the true appearance of the 3 streaks of black smoke. It was not smoke, but countless rays or light fragments. The black rays and black light fragments gathered together and became the darkest smoke in the world, as if it could swallow all other rays of light. Because of the fear in his heart, he subconsciously waved his hand, trying to use the willow branch in his hand to smash and disperse the 3 black smoke. But the next moment, he found that the willow branch in his hand turned into a big black umbrella. The big black umbrella opened with a swoosh and covered his body. He suddenly felt much safer. By the Daming Lake, Ning Ke was struggling on the verge of breaking the realm. On the snow cliff dozens of miles away from the Daming Lake, Prince Longqing, who had entered the realm breaking with Ning Ke at the cost of his whole life, had also stepped on the threshold of the knowing destiny state. With 1 foot on the threshold, it was not stable. It could move forward or backward, as if standing on the boundary between 2 worlds, or embracing Haotian's divine light, or falling into depravity. Prince Longqing had been sitting on the snow cliff for a long time. The wind and snow in Tianqi Mountain covered his right half with a thick layer of armor. The left half of his body in the world of Verdant Valley was as usual, with half of his body covered with snow and the other half fresh. This scene looked really strange. Suddenly, he stood up and calmly brushed off the snow on his body. He did not care about leaving the cliff of enlightenment. He just walked slowly to the bottom of the snow cliff and caught a snow sheep. Then he let the snow sheep go. With his back to the verdant and his face to the snow mountain, he seemed to be thinking about something. The green in the valley spread up the cliff like mountain vines, and grass gradually grew among the snow under his feet, like stars. If you want to get rid of the fence, why bother to be trapped in the fence? After a day's rest, the cold became very serious. I feel dizzy, uncomfortable, and sore. Fortunately, there is nothing wrong with my brain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 256. There were many typos in the chapter the day before yesterday. You can probably feel my drowsiness. I have already corrected some of it, but I haven't uploaded it yet. My current discomfort is called Kyuni Madi. Standing in front of the verdant valley and looking at the desolate snow mountain, Prince Longqing was silent. He knew that he was faced with a choice again. The result of the choice was not important, but the spirit that he showed when making the choice. With the experience of climbing the mountain in the academy, he did not hesitate this time and turned to walk into the verdant valley. The moment his boots left the snow, the wind and snow on the snow cliff and the mountains behind him suddenly stopped. He looked up and saw that the thick clouds had disappeared, revealing the clear sky behind him. The dark blue and tranquil sky was an objective and real existence. However, when it was reflected in his Tao heart, the sky that appeared in his sea of consciousness had a completely different appearance. Half of it was clear black, and the other half was dazzling and resplendent like an array of stars. Once again standing between light and darkness, he shook his head with a smile after a short silence. He stepped on the snow cliff near the verdant valley and continued to walk. With every step he took, a few blades of grass would grow beside his boots. The grass magically became more and more luxuriant, gradually covering the entire snow cliff. The fence at the end of the snow cliff that had trapped him for many days had already fallen to the ground. On the top of one of the firewood, he could faintly see a star-like green. Although the green was weak, it was extremely pure. When he approached it, he could see clearly that it was a leaf about the size of half a fingernail, glowing with a faint green. This firewood was completely lifeless, but at this moment, a new bud had sprouted. Looking at the speed at which this new bud was growing, perhaps it wouldn't be long before it grew more green leaves, and in the end, it might even bear a beautiful flower. Prince Longqing quietly looked at the green bud on the top of the firewood. Although there was no expression on his face, his heart was already warm and extremely moved. The so-called knowing destiny was to understand the origin of the world, to master the law of the qi of heaven and earth, and even the law of life. Only such a cultivator could be regarded as a true Taoist. At this time, he was only a step away from the knowing destiny state, and there was no obstacle on the Taoist heart that could stop him. Only when the green leaves grew and the petals sprouted, he would be able to break the realm. However, the expression on his face gradually became serious, because the greatest taboo was to be disturbed during the moment of breaking through. If he had crossed the threshold of knowing destiny in the Peach Mountain of West Hill, the great divine priest of judgment would have personally protected him. However, at this time, he was deep in the snow mountain of the wilderness. He had to overcome all the dangers and obstacles by himself. At this moment, the sound of clothes fluttering in the wind rang out. The Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, appeared on the snow cliff in red. Her black Taoist bun was slightly messy and her beautiful face looked a little tired. She must have consumed a lot of energy in the chase with Tang Xiaotang. She glanced at Prince Longqing, and her clear and cold eyes revealed a trace of scorching and admiration. But she did not do anything. Without a word, she sat down not far from him and looked around coldly. Prince Longqing nodded to her to express his gratitude. Then he sat beside the firewood that had sprouts and slowly closed his eyes to wait for the moment when the flowers bloomed. He calmly and joyfully welcomed the arrival of the knowing destiny state. Deep in the verdant valley, beside the Daming Lake, Ning Ke slightly bowed his head on the stone. He seemed to have fallen asleep. The willow branch in his hand trembled from time to time in the lake as his body moved up and down. A fish swam from the depths of the lake. The movement of its tail was a little strange, mainly because its rhythm was not as light as that of its companion. It seemed to be a little tired. With the light shining into the lake, it saw the trembling willow branch. Then it swam over and carefully held it with its lips. The fish knew that it was a willow branch, and it was a willow branch that had become white and fat after being soaked in the lake. There was no meat or worms on it, but it wanted to swim over and hold it. Because the fish always felt that it should be there, and it was born to be there. Because the willow branch was so close to its confidant, as if it was a part of its body. Ning Ke opened the big black umbrella in his dream. Then he woke up and found that he was still holding the willow branch tightly in his hand. He rubbed his eyes with his left hand and found that the willow branch, which had not been touched for a long time, moved again. He could still vaguely feel the drooping feeling between his fingers. He picked up the willow branch and found that there was a fish hanging on it. The fish kept swinging its tail, splashing water everywhere. However, the strange thing was that no matter how much it struggled, the fish's lips were tightly biting on the willow branch, unwilling to let go. Ning Kai thought that the fish was really stupid. The vast North Min Mountain was the Tianqi Mountain. It covered thousands of miles and was as vast as the starry sky at night. The Verdant Valley was just an inconspicuous place in the Tianqi Mountains. There were more protruding snow-capped peaks and cliffs. Two extremely straight and steep cliffs had been facing each other in silence for thousands of years. In the middle was a terrifyingly deep and bottomless gorge. Two people were sitting on the two cliffs in silence, just like the cliffs themselves, facing each other in silence. A Taoist priest sat on the east cliff. He had calm eyes and a thin body. He wore a pale white collarless robe and carried a thin wooden sword without a sheath on his back. His black hair was still combed into a bun, with an ordinary ebony fork inserted in it. It was not as unshakable as a pine tree, but more like a cloud attached to the beautiful sky. On the west side of the cliff sat a man. His eyes were calm and his body was strong. He was wrapped in a winter coat made of animal skin and cotton. His hands were empty and he had no weapons. The slightly bulging muscles under his clothes seemed to contain infinite power. His bare legs were casually covered with boots that no one knew where he picked up. It was as if he could break the sky with just one step. The child-looking Tang Xiaotang stood behind the man and held the blood-red giant knife tightly. She looked warily at the Taoist priest sitting on the opposite cliff. She felt a little cold. She knew who the Taoist priest was. She also knew that the deep gorge between the two cliffs seemed insurmountable. However, whether it was her brother or the Taoist priest on the opposite cliff, they could meet at any time if they wanted to. Because they were the world wayfarers of Jishou Abbey and Devil's Doctrine. A cold wind blew in the gorge. The Taoist priest on the east cliff spoke slowly with his clothes fluttering. He was dozens of feet away, but his voice was so clear that it seemed to be ringing in everyone's ears. I haven't seen you for 14 years. You are still like a stone, Tang. Tang said, the proud Yi Su seems not so proud anymore. Yi Su said calmly, you have been guarding me for 3 days and 3 nights. Are you going to guard me forever? Tang said, this is our place. Yi Su shook his head and said, but the tomes of arcane are our tomes of arcane. Tang shook his head and said coldly, this tome of arcane is our tome of arcane. Yi Su said, the Devil's Doctrine has already withered. The other branches have all disappeared. Your teacher has not appeared in the world for a long time. I'm afraid he has already disappeared. Only you and your sister are left. How can you resist the torrent of fate? Tang said, there are pillars in the middle. Yi Su looked at him quietly and suddenly said, you don't fight because you have your reasons. Tang looked at him coldly and said, you have your reasons for not fighting. After a moment of silence, Yi Su said, I've waited for 14 years for an opportunity to ask him for guidance. If I fight with you before this, it'll be too disrespectful to myself and him. Tang said coldly, you can't be reasoned with. You are not qualified to fight him. Yi Su smiled and said, I have to give it a try. Are you interested? Tang shook his head and said directly, I am no match for him. Moreover, my reasons are not because of him. Yi Su raised his eyebrows and asked, you have seen him? Tang nodded. Yi Su said, since both of you have your reasons for not fighting, are you really going to continue watching on this cliff? Tang looked into the distance and somewhere in the vast mountains. He said, who do you think will break the realm first? Yi Su followed his gaze and said calmly, I believe in the Prince of Haotian Taoism. Tang said, I believe in Ning Ke because he is a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Yi Su said no more. Tang did not say anything either. The two of them were silent on their respective cliffs. The bet had been made. Ning Ke did not know whether he would break the realm or not. It was no longer just a bet between him and Prince Long Qin, but a more important external factor that would indirectly affect the two powerful world wayfarers. His demeanor and behavior did not show any signs of anxiety or nervousness, as if he was not affected by the promise to break through the realm. He took the stupid fish from the lakeside and waved his hand to signal Shanshan to move aside. He took out all the seasonings and animal oil he could find from his luggage and prepared to cut the fish raw. The fish in Daming Lake were delicate, fat, and scaleless, especially their bellies, which seemed to be transparent. When he put it in the frying pan, there was a sizzling sound and a strange fragrance. Holding a branch, Ning Ke stood by the fire and looked at the color of the fish skin in the pot attentively. He frowned and looked more serious than when he was cultivating the enlightenment state. He only flipped the fish skin after a long time. Instead of using firewood, he used the talisman fire in an extremely extravagant manner, controlling the temperature extremely precisely. While carefully frying the fish, he explained to Mo Shanshan, when it comes to frying fish, the heat is the most important, and you can't flip it casually. This thing is just like governing a country and cultivation. Strategically, we can look down on it and tell ourselves that frying fish is nothing, but tactically, we must pay attention to it and be careful. The calligraphy addict was begged by him to give up 2 fire talismans. Thinking of cooking with talisman Taoism, she felt a little sad and distressed. But after listening to his explanation, she felt that it was indeed the case. The translucent belly of the fish gradually swelled in the warm oil, and gradually revealed the shining hook inside. Ning Ke was stunned. It took him a long time to figure out that this fish was the first one that took the bait when he was fishing by the lake and then took away all the meat on the hook. You were obviously unwilling at that time. Why did you come back without a hook now? Looking at the yellowish and fragrant fish in the pot, he slowly raised his eyebrows and showed a smile on his face. He handed the branch in his hand to Mo Shanshan, turned around and walked to the lakeside. Looking at the snow-capped peak reflected in the lake, the psyche power in his sense of perception moved out of his body according to his mind. However, he did not perceive the surrounding qi of heaven and earth, because the psyche power had integrated with the qi of heaven and earth by the Daming Lake. He slowly closed his eyes, and his mind followed the psyche power that integrated with heaven and earth. He saw the blue stone by the lakeside, the fish in the lake, the gravel under the fallen leaves, and everything else. It was not an ordinary look, not a look through the light, and not a perception of the surroundings by controlling the qi of heaven and earth with the psyche power. It was the most subtle perception of heaven and earth. Then Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. He saw the white clouds floating in the blue sky, which were in various shapes. Some were like horse gang, some were like horses, some were like Shubi Lake, some were like trees in Min Mountain, some were like the cornice of Spring Breeze Pavilion, and some were like the old library. He stretched out his trembling fingers and gently drew in the wind by the lakeside. He murmured, "This world is full of talismans." Mo Shanshan held the branch in her hand and looked at the fish being fried in the pot. Her pretty little face was filled with nervousness. She didn't know when she would be able to move. As the smell of burning gradually spread, the translucent belly of the fish in the pot suddenly exploded. The fish hook flew out with a ding and fell into the lake water, disappearing instantly. Listening to Ning Ke's silly words, she looked at the messy fish in the pot and whispered shamefully, "The fish broke." Ning Ke turned around and looked at her seriously, "I broke it too. After designing for a long time, I finally found my own favorite design for breaking the realm. I like this chapter. The life of a foodie is always happier than that of a bitter cultivator. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 257. Thousands of streams converged into a river, crossing thousands of miles of valleys, hills, plains and mudflats, and finally gushed out to the sea. It was so pleasant, just like Ning Kei's mood at the moment. He used to be a naughty boy in Chang'an City, but he suddenly encountered an accident. He was used to the ugliest things in the world and experienced the most dangerous things in the world. In his young age, he had to wander around with Sang Sang, and finally became a woodcutter boy in a border town. When he knew there was Tao in the world, he didn't know where it was. He went to the market in Kaiping to find a record of the response of the Tao, but he couldn't find anything after reading it for several years. When he met a sage by chance, he realized that all his acupoints were blocked, and the so-called cultivation was just an infatuation and delusion. Fortunately, in the end, he was enlightened and entered the academy. All his complaints were gone. Today, he finally passed the important juncture of cultivation and entered the see-through state. He only felt extremely comfortable both physically and mentally. Standing by the lake with his hands on his waist, he leaned back and looked up at the clouds floating in the blue sky. He only wanted to shout or giggle a few times to express all the pleasure in his chest and abdomen. Mo Shanshan looked at him by the lake and found that his figure was so harmonious with the lake and mountains. Feeling the aura coming from the wind, she understood what he had done and showed a sincere smile. Ning Kei looked at the clouds in the sky, the clouds on the lake, and the real or imaginary snow-capped peaks in the clouds. He was moved to understand the subtle feelings brought by the see-through state. At this time, he didn't have a clear understanding of the real meaning of entering the see-through state, but at least he clearly felt that his understanding of talisman Taoism had deepened a lot. On a clear day, in a winter lake, in a verdant valley, all the traces between heaven and earth turned out to be the lines of talisman. Because of this new understanding, he had a strong desire to set up a desk by the lake, grind the ink and write down all the traces between heaven and earth in his sense of perception. But he didn't do so, because there were more important things waiting for him to deal with. On the south bank of the Daming Lake, there was a gentle slope near the cliff of the verdant valley. With the dissipation of the tactical formation and the return of spring, the gentle slope had long been occupied by green weeds and turned into a meadow. However, the outermost part of the meadow facing the cliff was invaded by the chill outside the valley, so it looked a little withered. Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan stood in the frost grass and looked up at the snow cliff in the distance. Today the sky was blue and clean, and the view was excellent. However, there were countless tiny particles in the air that were invisible to the naked eye. It was impossible to see the snow cliff from a distance of more than 10 miles, and even the snow cliff could not be seen. Although Ning Kei could not see the snow cliff, it did not mean that he could not see it at all. Ning Kei had just entered the see-through realm, and it was the moment when his spirit and aura were at their peak. His senses, which were usually very sensitive, were even more acute. In his sense of perception, he could clearly see a bright ball of light. The ball of light was golden and unusually bright, and its edge scattered like a beautiful flower. He was shocked by the scene that appeared in his sea of consciousness, and subconsciously asked, "The see-through realm, is this powerful? How can it perceive the scene from such a long distance?" Mo Shanshan looked at the direction of the snow cliff more than 10 miles away and said thoughtfully, "It's not that the see-through realm can perceive the aura of heaven and earth from such a long distance, but because Prince Long Qing has reached the critical moment of breaking the realm. He wants to break the knowing destiny state, so the movement is not small. At this time, he is about to take that step, and the Taoist meaning and psyche power that he has obtained for decades of cultivation are all discharged out of his body, which interferes with the qi of heaven and earth too much. That's why we can see it." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei smiled and said, "One step is not enough. In the end, I won. Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked, "What should we do next?" Ning Ke said matter-of-factly, "Of course to tell Long Qing that I have already broken the realm. Since he has lost the bet, he will destroy his snow mountain and ocean of Qi later. Then why should he work so hard to break the realm? If he admits defeat now, it may be less painful. If he really enters the knowing destiny state and destroys himself, I think it is too cruel." Mo Shanshan looked at him with mixed feelings, thinking that Long Qing was only one step away from the knowing destiny state that cultivators dreamed of, and he would soon become a grand cultivator. At this moment, would he really fulfill the bet and abandon his cultivation and identity in the Divine Hall? "Ning Ke, you don't seem to be as innocent as you usually are. Now the problem is how to tell him that he has lost," Ning Ke said. Mo Shanshan shook her head gently and said, "When you break the realm, your Taoist heart is clear. You and I can feel him. His perception is also extremely sharp. The moment you broke the realm, he should have already known." Ning Ke looked at the invisible snow cliff and asked after a moment of silence, "Then what is he waiting for?" Prince Long Qing was waiting for the flowers to bloom. The green on the firewood beside him had already bloomed. There was a pink peach blossom on top of a dozen green and tender leaves. The peach blossom was blooming at a speed visible to the naked eye. One by two, the delicate petals slowly stretched out. The delicate petals slightly trembled in the wind, and a few drops of dew could be faintly seen on them. The peach blossom had already bloomed 4 petals, and the 5th one was slowly and firmly unfolding in the air. If the last petal also fully unfolded, it would be in full bloom and full bloom. That was the knowing destiny state. The fluctuation of aura from the depths of the verdant valley was clearly transmitted to the snow cliff and reflected in his sense of perception, which was the most sensitive in his life. He knew that Ning Ke had broken the realm, but so what? Prince Long Qing closed his eyes and sat calmly and joyfully on the snow cliff, sitting outside the fence, sitting in front of the green leaves and pink peach, waiting for the moment when he broke the realm. Perhaps it would be the next moment. In the eyes of the grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, the former peers in the cultivation world would become nonentities. Any obstacles that could affect their Taoist heart would no longer exist. Because once they reached the knowing destiny state, there would be a difference between the world and the outside world. Once they reached the knowing destiny state, they would no longer be a person of the world and naturally would not care about the rules and principles of the world. The Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, sat on the other side of the snow cliff. She did not look at Long Qing because she knew that he would enter the knowing destiny state today. Instead, she felt a little bored and could not help but frown impatiently. It was strange that as one of the best in the younger generation of the West Hill Divine Palace, she and Prince Long Qing were in charge of the judicial department. Although they did not fight openly, they had secretly competed with each other. Over the years, she had been suppressing Long Qing. Now that Long Qing was about to enter the knowing destiny state, she did not know why she did not care and did not feel that it was a threat. She also did not stare at the verdant valley because she had already sensed the change of the breath of heaven and earth. She knew that the academy disciple named Ning Ke had entered the see-through state. Although it was a little unexpected, she did not care. She thought that if she wanted to maintain the dignity of the Divine Hall, she could kill Ning Ke and the calligraphy addict later. Then who in the world would know about this bet? Looking into the distance, Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is he going to break his promise?" Mo Shanshan said softly, "It's impossible for him to admit defeat at this time. A loss is a loss. He has to admit it even if he doesn't want to." Ning Ke said, "I told you that day that if I enter the see-through state first, he has to keep his promise." Mo Shanshan turned to look at him with confusion in her eyes. She did not understand how Ning Ke could force him to fulfill the promise of breaking the realm when they were more than 10 miles apart and he was about to enter the knowing destiny state. There is only one rule in the gambling house. If you lose, you have to admit it. Ning Ke put his luggage on the ground and took out a heavy Polonia wooden box. He said, if anyone dares to break his promise or is caught cheating, the most useful part of his body will be cut off. There were strangely shaped metal objects in the Polonia wooden box. These metal objects had a dark surface and were woven by countless extremely thin metal wires. They seemed to contain extremely tough power. Mo Shanshan frowned. She knew that Ning Ke attached great importance to his heavy luggage on the way to the wilderness. It was only today that she found out that the luggage contained these strange things, but she did not know what they were used for. Ning Ke took out the metal objects in the box and slowly rubbed his fingers on the slightly rough surface. Then he sped up his movements. With the sound of the metal components being buckled, a dark metal bow was quickly formed. Then he began to string it and took out a dark alloy arrow from the dark quiver. The shaft of the arrow was densely covered with scale-like fine lines. It was unknown how many times it had been forged to produce such an effect. If one looked carefully, one could also find some deeper lines among the scale-like fine lines. Those were talisman lines. Mo Shanshan stared at the dark iron bow and arrow in his hands. She was shocked and subconsciously raised her hand to cover her mouth. The unique primordial 13 arrows made by the unique academy in the world. It appeared in front of the world for the first time in the vast Tianxi mountain. On the day when they made the promise to break the realm, Ning Ke had asked Mo Shanshan what would happen if she was suddenly attacked by the outside world at the most critical moment of breaking the realm. At that time, Mo Shanshan had answered that the person breaking the realm would suffer a severe backfire and might even have no hope of breaking the realm in this life. So he had decided to fulfill the promise on behalf of Prince Longqing. Standing on the white frosted meadow, Ning Ke looked at the distant cliff dozens of miles away and the golden flower that was about to bloom in his sense of perception. There was no expression on his face. It was as calm as a lake in winter. The aura that Prince Longqing emitted after breaking through the knowing destiny state was too bright. It was as bright as a bonfire at night. There was no need to aim at it. It appeared clearly in front of him. If you are well, it is a sunny day. Today was a sunny day, suitable for archery. Ning Ke took a deep breath and raised the iron bow to aim at the distant snow cliff. He slowly pulled back his right arm. The hard iron bow was slightly deformed and the bowstring was deeply inserted between his fingers. It is so good that the world is flat. After saying this, he loosened his fingers. The tight bowstring rubbed against his fingertips and rebounded at a high speed, driving the talisman arrow to shoot out. The sharp arrowhead instantly protruded forward from the archer's grip. When it traveled a certain distance, the diamond embedded in the archer's grip slightly rubbed against the metal arrow shaft. The diamond tip, which had an extremely complicated profile, casually drew a line on the arrow shaft like a brush tip dipped in ink on a piece of paper. It was the blank talisman on the arrow shaft. It was the last stroke of the talisman. The tail of the arrow finally left the bowstring. It was unknown whether it was because of the high speed or the activation of the talisman on the arrow, but when the tail of the arrow left the bowstring, it brought a milky white turbulence. Then the primordial 13 arrows disappeared in the milky white turbulence. Note, Prince Longqing, who was sitting cross-legged on the snow cliff, felt the fluctuation of the aura of heaven and earth from afar. He even clearly sensed Ning Ke's hostility and killing intent. However, he did not care and even opened his eyes contemptuously. In his sense of perception, half of the darkness had been defeated. It was as if the stars were about to occupy the entire sky. On the firewood behind him, the peach blossom had already bloomed, and the last petal was about to burst out with a final tremble. The higher one's cultivation, the harder it was to break the realm, and the more dangerous it was. However, he did not believe that Ning Ke had any means to interfere with him since they were so far apart. If it was not the sword of Lu Bai, the sage of sword, who could hurt someone from more than 10 miles away, then it could only be the legendary sage who had entered the limitless state. But did such a person really exist in the world? Moreover, he had the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, to protect him. This was Prince Long Qing's real thought when he was about to enter the knowing destiny state for the first time in his life. Then he immediately knew that he was wrong. Ning Ke, who had just broken the realm, was at the most perfect peak of his life. He did not adjust, did not wait, and did not even allow himself to be overflowing with joy. He shot his most powerful primordial 13 arrows. The power of meditation accumulated over the past 10 years, the tenacity left in his heart from all the hardships and struggles, all the knowledge of heaven and earth, as well as the hatred, unwillingness, resentment, indignation, and callousness, were all released in this arrow. It had nothing to do with revenge, but it was indeed very happy. The water of Daming Lake was rolling and shaking, and the fish were panicking. From the meadow to the snow cliff, countless fallen leaves floated down, and the treetops fled in panic, forming a hollow. The invisible arrow moved forward in this empty space. This arrow shocked the quiet lake, disturbed the dense forest, withered new peaches. Prince Long Qing opened his eyes in shock and looked at the verdant valley. His face instantly became extremely pale. Prince Long Qing lowered his head in astonishment and looked at the chest of the black-robed man. His eyes instantly became extremely sad. A flower bloomed on the chest that was covered by the black Taoist robe. It was not the golden flower that bloomed after he mastered the West Hill Taoism in his wonderful dream. It was a flower of blood. Behind the flower was a hole. A very empty hole. There was nothing in the hole. The moment before, the dark and slender primordial 13 arrows disappeared on Ning Ke's bowstring and in the milky white turbulence of primordial qi. The next moment, the primordial 13 arrows came to Prince Long Qing. This talisman arrow did not seem to need time to fly, and it could ignore the distance. The hard talisman arrow directly pierced through Prince Long Qing's chest and abdomen, bringing out a very exaggerated flower of blood. It tore up the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body, and then continued to fly like a black lightning until it shot into the mountain far behind the snow cliff. There was a loud bang. The accumulated snow on the waist of the mountain began to collapse, gradually turning into a white torrent, and the sound was like thunder. The clear sky suddenly became gloomy, and there were black clouds in the north of the wilderness. Prince Long Qing looked down at the transparent hole in his chest and abdomen, and his body slowly trembled. The arrow was too fast, so fast that he could not react at all. It was so fast that after the blood splashed, the blood in the horrible wound did not have time to ooze out, and it penetrated his body and disappeared without a trace. The peach blossom on the firewood beside him had already withered. The bright stars in his sense of perception had already been broken, and the remaining dark night had already been torn into pieces. Prince Long Qing moved the corner of his mouth and smiled with difficulty. But the smile was so painful that it went deep into his bones. Thousands of streams turned into water, and then converged into a river, crossing thousands of miles of valleys, hills, plains, and mudflats. Finally, the waves surged violently, and when they were about to go out to sea, they encountered a cliff that was tens of thousands of feet high, and the waves were scattered into foam. It was so sad, just like his mood at this time. He was originally a prince of the capital of Yan Kingdom, but he had many adventures, and was used to the most prosperous and luckiest experiences in the world. In his youth, he had to travel to various countries to make judgments, and finally, he was blessed by Haotian and became the brilliant son of God in the Peach Mountain. Today, he was finally about to pass the important juncture of cultivation and enter the knowing destiny state. He only felt that his body and mind were incomparably comfortable. With his back against the green, he faced the snow peak, and the old wood beside him bore new peaches. It seemed that his life was about to be complete. However, at this moment, an arrow flew from the sky. An arrow destroyed everything he had. How could he not feel pain? Note, the 207 words here were directly used from the first volume of the primordial 13 arrows. No matter how I thought about it, I could not think of a better description of shooting arrows. Therefore, I used it directly. Even if I cut out the number of words in this chapter is still sufficient. I would like to report to everyone that I have put in a lot of effort into this chapter. Please read carefully. Today is the World Sleep Day, but patient I have actually been unable to sleep until now because of coughing and random thoughts. I do not know how to praise myself, but fortunately I was awake when I was writing. There is no reason to need votes for the recent updates, but I like the quality of these two chapters very much, so there is no reason to not need votes. So if you are willing to vote for my recommendation in monthly votes, please vote for Jiang Yi. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for my recommendation in monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 258. Yi Hongyu floated to Prince Longqing's side. She frowned and her expression was solemn. She reached out her jade-white palm and placed it on his head. A faint and pure aura of Taoism surged from her palm and enveloped his body. The faint and pure aura gradually became thicker and shone with a golden light, just like Haotian's divine light. Then, she flicked her left sleeve and stuffed a pill into his mouth. She then crushed it with her palm and pushed it into his abdomen. With her simple and quick actions, the blood flowing out from the arrow wound on Prince Longqing's chest and abdomen magically stopped. One could even vaguely feel a strong aura of life constantly repairing something. This pill was a top-grade medicine that the Tao addict had brought out from the temple when she was young. The Taoism aura with a strong aura of life was a secret skill of Peach Mountain. With this method, she had pulled Prince Longqing back from the brink of death. Prince Longqing's face was extremely pale, but he would not die on the spot. However, no matter what Yi Hongyu was doing, he did not respond. He just silently lowered his head and looked at his chest. A drop of sweat fell from Yi Hongyu's temple and was instantly blown away by the snow wind under the dark clouds. In order to save Prince Longqing, she had suffered a great loss in a short period of time. She simply said, "It was too fast." If it were any other time, the proud Tao addict would never explain anything, even if the other person was the divine priest of judgment. However, she had appeared on this snow cliff today to protect Longqing, but she had failed to stop the arrow, causing Longqing to be seriously injured and on the verge of death. Therefore, she felt that it was necessary to explain. That arrow was too fast, so fast that she could not even react. Prince Longqing did not answer her. She did not know whether it was because of his heavy injury or some other reason. He looked at his chest in confusion. He knew that the injury on his body could probably be healed in a few months. However, the ocean of qi that was destroyed by the arrow, especially the Taoist heart that was damaged when he broke the realm, could never be repaired. In his sea of consciousness, the stars that filled the sky had shattered into billions of messy mirrors, and the dark night that had been twisted into cotton drifted everywhere in the space, gradually occupying all corners in his line of sight. He looked at the hole in his chest like a fool. It was as if he could see this chaotic world. In that instant, he recalled many things, as well as everything he had experienced in those times. The colorful chapters, the dazzling images, the cold and unmoving face illuminated by the firewood, the half-burnt body crying out in pain on the fire execution platform, the rotting corpses in the U prison, and the proud and calm self that watched all these, all turned into countless pieces of snow and quickly flashed past the black Taoist robe in front of him. Many people died in his hands, including strong and violent men, chaste and fair virgins, charming and voluptuous women, frail and old men, and adorable children. Because of his devotion to Taoism and devotion to Haotian, he did not hesitate or waver. He happily destroyed the lives of all living beings. However, only at this moment did he realize that the feelings he felt when he destroyed another person's life were all fake. Only the pain of his own life being destroyed was real. Therefore, he saw his gloomy and hopeless future. Yi Hongyu looked at the gloomy luster on his face. She knew that his pride and his strong cultivation willpower were all destroyed by that arrow. She could not help but scold him in a low voice, "Do you want to destroy yourself?" Hearing these words, Prince Longqing suddenly laughed. His hoarse laughter was very weak. In the gradually increasing wind and snow, he seemed to be extremely painful and confused. Then he murmured softly, "I'm already useless." There was no possibility of entering the knowing destiny state. For a divine son of West Hill who was willing to dedicate his life to Haotian, living was just like a dog. He painfully turned his head with difficulty and looked at the wind and snow outside the cliff and the darkening sky in the depths of the wilderness. He said in confusion, "I was a prince. I was going to be the Yen Emperor. My feet stood on both sides of Taoism and the human world. I should have been unparalleled in the world. However, I have been destroyed. I have been abandoned by Haotian in the world of pain and darkness." In the eyes of Haotian Taoism, luck was a gift from Haotian to human beings, while misfortune was a punishment from Haotian. He had been so lucky in his life. However, today in this mountain abandoned by Haotian, he suddenly found himself ruthlessly abandoned by Haotian. No matter how strong his will and Taoist heart was, he could not bear such a huge blow. Prince Longqing slowly stood up. His severely injured and extremely weak body swayed in the wind and snow. He let out a painful howl like a beast before he managed to stand up. He ignored Yi Hongyu beside him and took a step forward. He missed a step and rolled down the snow cliff. With a dull thud, he fell down the snow cliff. His body wrapped in black lay in the snow, motionless. Yi Hongyu walked to the edge of the cliff and silently looked at the snow below. Time passed slowly and the wind and snow between the cliffs became stronger. Prince Longqing, who was about to be buried in the snow, suddenly moved and then stood up with great difficulty. He covered his chest and stepped on the deep snow to walk out of the mountain. Sometimes he fell and got up again. He slowly walked towards the dark lead clouds in the north of the wilderness. He was better off dead than alive. He was like a fool. He did not know his fate. He was like a wounded dog without a home. Because of his violent struggle, the arrow wound on his chest that had been temporarily stopped by the aura of Taoism opened up again. Blood flowed out from between Prince Longqing's fingers and dripped onto the snow, leaving a very long red line on the snow below the cliff. The line of blood did not last long and was quickly covered by the wind and snow. His miserable figure was finally covered by the wind and snow. Yi Hongyu watched his figure disappear in the wind and snow without saying a word. She did not know when he would fall down again and be unable to get up again. He would eventually become an ice corpse in the cold wilderness. She only knew that this guy who was once qualified to threaten her was still alive, but he was already dead. After a long time, she slowly turned around and quietly looked at the verdant valley on the other side of the snow cliff. Without a trace of emotion, she said, "Some people should die," so, her words stopped abruptly. She gazed into the distance and fell into a long silence. The wind and snow gradually brushed against her face and gradually froze her beautiful face. Her expressionless face looked like a beauty carved out of ice jade. Suddenly, she blinked. She blinked and shattered the frost on the ground. The grass that had almost occupied the entire snow cliff rapidly withered with Prince Longqing's destruction. The peach blossom on the firewood was also withering. However, as she blinked, the snow cliff changed again. The grass no longer withered or flourished. The peach blossom no longer withered or bloomed. It just stayed absolutely still at the moment when she blinked, as if time had frozen all life. Not everything was frozen. The wind and snow on the cliff did not freeze, nor did her red dress that danced with the wind. The cold wind swirled the snowflakes around her body and gradually turned into a very clear bundle of snow. It spun around her waist at high speed. The two straps of her fluttering red dress behind her were blown up by the wind and lightly touched the bundle of snow around her waist. It was like the tip of an ink brush dipping into clear water. The bundle of snow around her waist instantly turned bright red. On the two steep cliffs in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains, Yi Su, the wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey, and Tang, the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, sat opposite each other in silence across the bottomless valley. Neither the peach blossom beside Prince Long Qing nor Ning Ke breaking through the realm by cooking fish changed their expressions until the arrow passed through the entire verdant valley. This arrow is not bad. It is a good arrow. Yi Su looked into the distance and said indifferently, only the academy can have such a good arrow. Tang looked at him on the opposite cliff and said in a low voice, I only know that you have lost. Tang Xiaotang clenched the blood-red giant knife and stood behind her brother. She looked at the opposite side with vigilance and slight excitement. Yi Su stood up slowly. His thin body and simple Taoist bun made him look particularly lonely in the dark grey cliff. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and looked into the distance again. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, revealing a warm smile. Tang also felt the movement on the snow cliff and his expression changed slightly. Ning Ke slowly lowered his arm, and his hand holding the iron bow trembled slightly. This arrow had consumed too much of his psyche power, especially the damage to his shoulder muscles. However, he could not help but smile happily on his pale face. The dazzling light in his sense of perception was suddenly extinguished. Even if Prince Long Qing did not die, he would not be able to break the heavy door of knowing destiny state. If what Mo Shanshan said was true, he might not even be able to enter knowing destiny state in this life. Ning Ke was not surprised that the primordial 13 arrows could exert such a terrible power in the first real battle and could destroy a powerhouse like Prince Long Qing. At that time, he was only in no doubt state in the back of the mountain of the academy, but he was in the see-through state when he shot the arrow today. At that time, second brother's sleeves were torn when he flicked the arrow. Today, Prince Long Qing was at the critical moment of breaking the realm. How could he be stronger than second brother? Mo Shanshan stared at him, her ink-black eyes wide open and filled with confusion. Her thin and red lips were tightly pursed, as if she was filled with endless doubt and shock. Ning Ke rubbed his shoulder and looked at her with a smile. He said, Are you shocked by my bow and arrow? Mo Shanshan nodded gently. Ning Ke said proudly, Isn't it awesome? Mo Shanshan nodded again. Then she asked seriously, You have won the bet. Why did you shoot the arrow? Ning Ke said, The purpose of fighting is not to win, but to make the enemy fail. Looking at the girl's puzzled expression, he continued, If you win, but the enemy doesn't, then it is a false victory. If you don't seem to win, but the enemy fails, then it is a real victory. Mo Shanshan's thoughts had been changed by him along the way. She could roughly understand his explanation of fighting, but there were still many things she could not understand, such as why he had to make Prince Long Qing fall into such a terrible failure. Although you are the wayfarer of the academy and have the support of the Tang Empire, Prince Long Qing is the leader of the young generation favored by the great divine priests of Peach Mountain. He is the son of God of West Hill in the eyes of the believers of Haotian. However, he was destroyed by you in such a way. Have you not considered the irremediable consequences? Ning Ke said expressionlessly, If this is a bet, then he should pay the price of his promise after losing. If this is a battle, then I never consider other consequences before confirming the enemy's absolute failure. Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and shook her head. She said, This reason is not sufficient. You are a very smart person. You should be very clear that even if he entered the knowing destiny state, he would not dare to kill you. You should be more clear about the consequences if you kill him. But you still chose to shoot the arrow without any hesitation. Why? Ning Ke was silent for a moment and then said with a smile, he shouldn't have mentioned Sang Sang at that time. The most terrifying, coldest and most shameless Ning Ke in the world was the Ning Ke who heard others mention Sang Sang. Anyone who tried to use Sang Sang to threaten or control him, he would kill them by any means necessary. Because only in this way could he be sure that this kind of threat would never be established. Only in this way could he ensure that he would not live in anxiety and pain forever. This had become his living habit or his greatest instinct. This instinct started 14 years ago. He experienced the drought and famine in the northern part of the empire, the cannibalism, the old hunter's bathtub in the wild forest of Min Mountain, and killed countless horse gangs in the grassland outside the city of Wei. This was the most untouchable point for Ning Ke and his greatest principle. There would never be any exception, whether it was Prince Long Qing, the Emperor of Tang, or even the headmaster of the academy. In Chang'an, Princess Li Yu once thought that she had discovered Sang Sang was Ning Ke's weakness and Ming Men. A few days ago on the snow cliff, Prince Long Qing tried to confirm that Sang Sang was Ning Ke's weakness and Ming Men according to the information from the Divine Hall. However, they were all wrong. Sang Sang was not Ning Ke's Ming Men. Sang Sang was Ning Ke's life. That was why Ning Ke, who was most afraid of death, could sacrifice his own life in order to save his own. Naturally, he did not care about the lives of others. War and peace in the world were nothing compared to him. Therefore, even if his opponent was Prince Long Qing, he would choose to destroy him with one arrow. He would not care about the consequences and would be very happy. After resting on the meadow for a while, Ning Ke recovered some energy. When he was about to put the primordial 13 arrows back into the Polonia box, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and felt a slight pain in his eyes, as if he had been pricked by a needle. He looked up in shock at the snow cliff in the distance again. In the silent and peaceful world of his sea of perception, a bright ball of light suddenly bloomed. The ball of light was so cold and powerful that it was even more dazzling than the light before Prince Long Qing broke through the realm. It felt very scary. Someone was breaking through the realm. Someone was breaking through the realm on the snow cliff. Someone was breaking through the knowing destiny state on the snow cliff. The person breaking through the knowing destiny state was stronger than Long Qing. Ning Ke felt the aura of Haotian's divine flame in the ball of white light. He deduced the identity of the person breaking through the realm on the snow cliff in the shortest time, and the expression on his face suddenly became extremely shocked. Then, without any hesitation or thinking, he quickly picked up the iron bow, pulled the bow and arrow, took a deep breath, and shot another arrow in the direction of the snow cliff in the distance. The quiet lake shook violently, and the air in the forest was torn. The white turbulence of the chi of heaven and earth in front of the iron bow had not disappeared. Ning Ke quickly took out the brocade bag that Master Yen Sei gave him from his sleeve and held it tightly in his palm. He stared at the broad-leaved forest in the south of the valley and said to Mo Shanshan in a low voice, "Prepare to kill another person. Tao Addict is coming." To be honest, the sicker the book is, the better it is. Tut tut. Thank you, Hai Tang, for helping me to point out mistakes and discuss with me about chapter titles. Tut tut, these chapters are really well written and the chapter titles are also good. By the way, there is a friend in the book review section who helped me to make a correction post. I would like to express my utmost gratitude. His name is Dirty Dog. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 259. It was very difficult for a cultivator to break the realm. Prince Longqing on the snow cliff and Ning Ke by the Daming Lake had to cultivate for years and wait for the right time to break the realm. But sometimes breaking the realm was very simple. For example, Ning Ke once comprehended the no-doubt state in one go and did not feel the hindrance between the three states at all. It was also very easy for the Taoism girl in the red dress to break the realm. The wind and snow condensed into a bundle around her waist. The grass and peach blossoms on the cliff seemed to bloom and wither. When the vitality condensed, she became a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. As everyone knew, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, was in a higher state than Prince Longqing. Even Longqing had reached the threshold of the knowing destiny state, not to mention her. She had stepped on the threshold a long time ago. But for some reason, she did not step over it. So when Longqing was about to enter the knowing destiny state, she was not jealous or afraid. Because she could enter the knowing destiny state at any time if she wanted to. A strong wave of the aura of heaven and earth erupted in the depths of the verdant valley. It was mixed with a frightening talisman intent. Yi Hongyu floated above the snow cliff with her eyes closed. Her red dress fluttered in the air around her. Her beautiful face was full of serenity, as if she did not notice the movement in the distance. However, the snow and wind around her suddenly became wild, making the red dress flutter. Almost at the same time that the strong aura in the depths of the valley soared, a bright red ribbon floating in front of her shattered into a sky full of butterflies with a hiss. That unstoppable, faintly discernible arrow trace passed through these blood butterflies, brushed past her shoulder, and flew diagonally into the distant sky. Then, it disappeared without a trace. The arrow that was shot from the depths of the verdant valley was unable to penetrate her body, but it still injured her shoulder. Bright red blood flowed down from her white and tender shoulder. When the blood butterflies that filled the sky fell on the snowy cliff, the beads of blood had already flowed to her left hand, dripping down her fingertips. Before the blood could drip onto the snow cliff, it was caught by a white hand. Yi Hongyu opened her eyes. There was no emotion in her eyes. She looked into the depths of the verdant valley and suddenly jumped off the snow cliff. Stepping on the protrusions of the cliff, she flew into the dense broad-leaved forest with the help of the wind. Once she entered the green forest, the thin branches danced with her clothes and the tender leaves gently brushed against her face. Her body seemed to have merged with the surrounding forest leaves and air, becoming a part of nature. If one did not look with the naked eye, they would not be able to detect her presence at all. Just like that, she drifted indifferently into the depths of the valley along with the forest wind. Ning Ke's judgment was very fast. He immediately guessed that the powerhouse on the snow cliff was the Tao addict. He had already destroyed Prince Longqing. Was he going to destroy the other hope of the West Hill Divine Palace? No matter how strong-willed a person was, they would be put in a difficult position when faced with such an unexpected situation. However, his reaction was faster than his judgment. Without hesitation, he used the primordial 13 arrows again. His actions seemed to be faster than his thinking. Killing one was killing, killing two was also killing. There was no need to be polite about this kind of thing, not to mention that he had already destroyed Prince Longqing. The Tao addict suddenly broke the realm at this time. At that moment, one could smell the great hidden danger in the blowing wind in the verdant valley. It was a pity that the second shot of the talisman arrow did not get the same effect as the first shot. At this time, his physical and mental state were not as good as when he had just broken the realm. More importantly, he did not expect that the Tao addict could break the realm so fast. She could break the realm before him when he responded so quickly and fiercely. A clear tearing pain came from his right shoulder. The psyche power fluctuation caused by the talisman in his sense of perception made him slightly dizzy. However, Ning Ke knew how hard he was and how hard his body was. He was sure that he could shoot many more times, so he was not discouraged. He still held the iron bow with the talisman arrow between his fingers and calmly aimed at the distance with no expression on his face. The ball of light on the snow cliff suddenly disappeared and blended into heaven and earth. He could vaguely see the green forest in the distance moving against the wind. The broad leaves were messy. Occasionally, a figure in a bright red dress would fly among them. Separated by such a long distance, he could only see it with his naked eyes. He could no longer determine the other's position in his sea of consciousness. How could he aim? Ning Kei's hand, which was holding the bow steadily, began to tremble. He knew that the situation was very bad, but he only allowed himself to panic for a very short moment before he quickly made a decision. He put the iron bow on his back, picked up the quiver, and turned to run down the meadow. At the same time, he shouted, "Run!" Just a moment ago, he had been calmly and fearlessly drawing his bow, but in the next moment, he was running away like a frightened rabbit. Mo Shanshan's fingers, which had been constantly tapping and calculating, suddenly froze. Looking at the back of the fellow who had already run to the bottom of the meadow, she asked in confusion, "Didn't you say that you were going to kill people here?" Ning Kei shouted anxiously without turning his head, "That woman is too cruel. We can't kill her, we can only be killed by her. Let's retreat." Sang Sang was Ning Kei's life. Sang Sang was a poor girl who had been abandoned since she was a child and survived by soaking in corpse water. She suffered from the congenital cold disease and was ordered around by Ning Kei for many years. This indirectly proved that Ning Kei's life was very hard. He had managed to avoid the disaster of bloodshed with the promise of breaking the realm. He had distanced himself from Prince Long Qing with an arrow. He had thought that after this, he would have a beautiful life. He only needed to open the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, take the tomes of Arcane, pick up some treasures, and find the familiar aura before returning to the south with glory. He did not expect that a stronger enemy would come next. Entering the snow mountain in the wilderness, they would definitely meet some strong enemies, including the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Kei had a meticulous idea and plan for these things. He took the calligraphy addict with him, carried the primordial 13 arrows, and carried the brocade bag. He was confident that he would be able to deal with any situation. However, he did not expect that Tao addict would start to break the realm before Prince Long Qing could break the realm. Moreover, Shiroi really succeeded in transforming into a terrifying grand cultivator. The waves in the front of the Yellow River were wrapping around the waves behind. Each wave was stronger than the previous one. It was so overwhelming that he could not stand it. It was like an unreasonable parent coming after he hit a child, or a gangster godfather coming after him. He bullied a tall, rich and handsome man, but his arrogant and cold sister, who inherited the great legacy of the family, came after him. His life was really too hard. Among the cliffs, Tang Xiaotang smashed the red giant knife in her hand on the ground. The little girl raised her hand and covered her mouth tightly. Looking at the source of the aura in the distance, she thought of what her brother had said. Her eyes were filled with disbelief and extreme worry. She said bitterly, "That crazy woman actually broke the knowing destiny state like this? Then I won't be able to beat her if I meet her again. How annoying." The desolate girl suddenly noticed the movement on the opposite cliff. Looking at the lonely figure in the Taoist robe, she said in surprise, "Why did he just leave like this? His sister has become a grand cultivator. Why didn't he react? Doesn't he want to help her?" Tang looked at the Taoist walking further and further away on the opposite mountain path. He looked at the Taoist's desolation and loneliness that was extremely discordant with heaven and earth. He thought of the proud and conceited young Taoist from 14 years ago. His thick eyebrows gradually furrowed and he said, "A person who has passed the hermetic death will naturally not care about things like family." The Taoist who walked down the cliff was more powerful than before. Tang did not care. Although he did not know how the Taoist had broken through the life-death latch, he knew that people who had entered that state would often be much more indifferent to the things around them. Their Taoist heart would continue to be proud in a new way. Naturally, they would not break their promise easily. He looked at the verdant valley in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "The Tao addict is really amazing. I don't know how she could resist the temptation of breaking through the realm at such a young age. She even forcibly sealed her state in the see-through state for such a long time. Is it so important for her to catch up with my brother's lonely figure?" Tang Xiaotang did not understand and asked in surprise, "Forcibly sealed her state? Why did she do that?" Sometimes cultivation is like climbing a mountain. Sometimes it is like using a ladle to fill a lake. Sometimes it is like using a stone to fill the sea. It is all about perseverance and willpower. But the last step, the last ladle, and the last stone represent the lucky chance. Tang said, "Different lucky chances lead to different gains. The Tao addict has already reached the end. She is only one step away from the peak, one ladle away from the lake, and one stone away from the sea. But she has never completed the last step. She resisted the temptation of becoming a grand cultivator of knowing destiny with great perseverance and forced herself to stay in the see-through state. She meditated and cultivated thousands of Taoist skills just to wait for the last lucky chance." Tang Xiaotang asked, "Today she suddenly broke through the knowing destiny state. Is it because the lucky chance has come?" As the saying goes, Taoism follows nature. The most wonderful thing about Haotian Taoism's lucky chance is to let nature take its course. Today, Long Qing was destroyed on the snow cliff, so the Tao addict was naturally angry. If she wants to kill Ning Ke and the calligraphy addict, she needs to break through the knowing destiny state. This kind of need is nature, so she naturally broke through the knowing destiny state. Tang Xiaotang turned his head and looked at his young sister with pity. He said, "I did not expect Ye's sister to be such a woman. Her perseverance in cultivation and pursuit of power are almost crazy. No wonder she is called the Tao addict. Tang, if you can't grow up quickly, you will never be her opponent." Tang Xiaotang was considered inferior to the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, but she was not ashamed or annoyed. She stuck out her tongue cutely and said proudly, "If I go to Chang'an City and ask the headmaster of the academy to be my teacher, I don't believe I can't beat her." After a moment of silence, Tang Xiaotang nodded and said, "You are right." Tang Xiaotang suddenly thought of something. She looked into the distance and said with a frown, "Brother, if I want to ask the headmaster of the academy to be my teacher, Ning Ke will be my senior brother. Should we go and save him now?" Tang stood up and said, "Although the Tao addict is good, don't forget that Ning Ke is the world wayfarer of the academy and the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. How can he die so easily?" After saying this, he suddenly fell into silence. He raised his eyes and looked around the desolate snow-capped peak. The cold wind on the cliff peak kept blowing against his iron-like chest. He didn't see anything, but he seemed to see what he wanted to see. Tang Xiaotang asked curiously beside him, "Brother, is the tomes of arcane in the front gate?" Tang shook his head slowly and said, "The headmaster did not tell me." Tang Xiaotang said with emotion, "I don't know when the headmaster will reappear in the world. 23 years cicada cultivation. Do we really have to wait for 23 years? After a moment of silence, Tang said, 23 years is coming. At this moment, intermittent singing came from the natural mountain path between the opposite cliffs. The lonely wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey walked in the lonely world and sang a Taoist song that was difficult to understand. Flowers bloom on the Iron Arrow Cliff, sprouts on the fat fish table, the sea is full of stones, I sleep in the stable, you are on the other side, the leader is sick. I took her to the hospital at night and did a checkup. It's not a big problem. She just has a fever and the doctor did not give her an infusion. She should take the medicine first. I am still sick and really tired. Damn it, it's like how Ning Ke feels. But it's also like Tang's praise. I can still hold on and write like this. It's worth praising. Thank God and you. Tomorrow is Saturday, just a day off. I wish everyone a happy weekend and good health. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 260. The treetop swayed against the wind, and the sound of leaves falling could be heard continuously. The red shadow approached the Daming Lake quickly. Neither the dense trees nor the cold wind could slow down the red shadow. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan rushed down the meadow and ran quickly to the other side of the lake. Although they were fast, they were still too slow compared with the speed of a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state. They had just run to the north bank of the Daming Lake when the figure of Tao Addict, Yi Hongyu, had floated out of the forest and landed on the wetland of the south bank. Without any threat of dialogue or negotiation, the Tao Addict looked at the two people on the other side of the lake and raised her right arm indifferently. Her index finger pointed in the air, and a very faint aura of Taoism slowly spurted out from her slender finger. The chi of heaven and earth above the slightly rippling lake suddenly fluctuated, and there seemed to be an invisible giant sword in the air, which suddenly cut down the bright lake and the mountains. After a loud noise, the green and clear lake water violently rolled, rolling the white waves and foam in fear to both sides, forming a deep gully about a few feet long, which seemed to directly see the bottom of the lake. This deep gully, which seemed to be cut by the invisible giant sword, started from the slender fingertips of the Tao Addict, toward the wetland of the south bank of the Daming Lake, toward the water grass and fish in the lake, and toward the lake water which had no specific shape, and directly stabbed Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan on the north bank of the lake in a straight line. Ning Ke felt the horrible aura coming from the distance behind him. He knew that even if he really turned into a rabbit at this time, there was no way to find a suitable shelter before the attack. Therefore, he only carried out a very simple thought, or in other words, he stopped and turned to shoot the talisman arrow. The iron bow was pulled, and the bowstring was as tight as his mood at this time. However, he did not let go of the bowstring, because there was already an invisible giant sword between him and the Tao Addict in red on the south bank. The chi of heaven and earth was strongly disordered in that space, which caused the violent flow of the air and even made the light refracted strangely. He could not aim at the opponent. But the sword chi had already torn the lake and the grassland on the north bank, and was about to arrive in front of them. Ning Ke let go of the bow and withdrew the arrow, and reached behind him to hold the big black umbrella. Mo Shanshan had been silently looking at the girl on the shore of the lake beside him. As the calligraphy addict, who was as famous as the Tao Addict, she must have felt a little strange when she found out that the other had broken through the knowing destiny state. Perhaps it was to dispel the strange emotion in her heart, or perhaps it was for other reasons, but facing the invisible Taoist sword that broke the lake water, she did not mean to avoid it. Instead, she calmly faced it. Her jade-white right hand stretched out from her cotton sleeve and began to write in the lakeside wind. Two extremely unhealthy blushes appeared on her face. Her slender fingers that were writing in the slightly cold wind by the lake trembled slightly. As she drew a few lines with her fingertips, a powerful invisible talisman power was generated with the wind. She knew that her original state was not as good as the Tao Addict. Now that the Tao Addict had entered the knowing destiny state, she did not hesitate to use her most powerful means, the half-divine talisman. The lines in the wind trembled and shrank, and then instantly broke into countless pieces. The talisman power on her fingertips suddenly collapsed, and the surrounding space was compressed rapidly. In an instant, it became a transparent air mass. The transparent air mass condensed by the half-divine talisman of the calligraphy addict and the invisible Taoist soared from the fingertips of the Tao addict met on the north bank of the Daming Lake. Suddenly, there were countless extremely thin turbulence in the air, just like catkins. The next moment, these catkins all burst open, and the compressed and tangled Taoist power and talisman power contained in them violently erupted in all directions. The surface of the clear lake shook violently, as if it was about to jump in the air. With a deafening bang, the water of the Wanqing Lake jumped and rushed up violently. The water splashed in the green valley, and the gradually condensed winter ice at the center of the lake was blown into pieces. Ning Kei's reaction was extremely fast. At the moment when the lake water collapsed, his right hand left the handle of the black umbrella and raised the iron bow again. He shot an arrow to the other side of the lake at the fastest speed. The sky was full of splashes, thin ice, and turbulence of the qi of heaven and earth, but Yi Hongyu seemed to be able to see everything on the other side of the lake. When he just raised the iron bow in his hand, she waved her hand. The thin ice that had just collapsed in the air seemed to have received an order, and instantly densely filled the space between the two of them. In front of the iron arrow with talisman power, the ice seemed to be more fragile than thin paper. In the cracking sound, the powerful and terrifying primordial 13 arrows ignored the space and pierced all the ice before the arrowhead like lightning, and appeared in front of the Tao addict. Yi Hongyu calmly looked at the man on the north bank of the lake, and did not dodge at all. The talisman arrow brushed past her previously injured shoulder. The distance was very close, and even the talisman power on the arrow made the broken pieces of her red dress fly up, but it could not hurt her. With a swoosh, it shot into the dense forest, and there was a continuous roar. No one knew how many green trees were shot down by this arrow. At this moment, the lake water that was broken by her invisible Taoist sword flowed back and filled the deep gully. The scattered thin ice drifted aimlessly on the surface of the lake, looking like wild duckweeds without owners. Yi Hongyu lightly flew up with the wind, and gracefully landed on a thin piece of ice in the middle of the lake. At this time, she was already a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, but she still did not have the confidence to avoid Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows at the distance of a lake. Therefore, she did not dodge at all, but chose to interfere with the trajectory of the primordial 13 arrows. The speed of the primordial 13 arrows was indeed very terrifying. It was impossible for a thin piece of ice to change its trajectory, but there would always be some kind of interference. What about dozens of thin pieces of ice and hundreds of thin pieces of ice? The Taoist bun of her black hair did not move in the wind, and the hair made her look delicate and bright. She stood on the thin ice on the lake and calmly looked at the other side of the lake. There was a very faint smile in her eyes, but there was not the slightest emotion in it. Mo Shanshan, who was slightly pale, looked at the girl on the thin ice on the lake without saying a word. Her right hand hanging outside her sleeve trembled slightly, and there was a slight sweetness in her throat. She thought with some confusion and unwillingness, is the knowing destiny state really so powerful? Ning Kei silently looked at the girl in red on the thin ice on the lake. He clenched his fists tightly, not to vent his unwillingness, but to relieve the tearing pain in his shoulder, and to quickly stop the trembling of his right hand that was controlling the arrow. This was the first time that he saw the legendary Tao addict, and the first time that he felt the power of the legendary Tao addict. Her power was not only in the power of the state, but also in the unbelievably precise control of the Taoist law. It seemed simple to change the trajectory of the primordial 13 arrows with hundreds of thin pieces of ice, but it was actually very difficult to do it. The angle of the contact between the thin ice and the arrow cluster in the air had to be extremely precise in order to achieve the infinite superposition of different small deviations. It was fine to control a piece of thin ice, but she controlled hundreds of thin ice at the same time in such a short period of time. What kind of precise control did she need? How on earth did she do it? The aftermath of the lake was still there. With the undulation of the water surface, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, who was standing on the thin ice, moved up and down gently. She looked at Mo Shanshan on the shore and said calmly, "The half-divine talisman is indeed a little interesting. Calligraphy addict, you have made a lot of progress and can be my opponent. If you can comprehend an unknowing destiny state and become a real divine talisman master, you may really have a chance to defeat me. Unfortunately, you still need many years to reach that step." Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her head and did not say anything. Yi Hongyu looked at Ning Ke and said with slight mockery, "You are Ning Ke. I know that you are the weakest world wayfarer in history, but I really did not expect that you would be so weak. You are a disgrace to the academy." If others laughed at Sang Sang, Ning Ke might be very angry and immediately jump up to greet the other party's ancestors. But if he was laughed at or ridiculed, he would not feel anything as long as he was not beaten to death. Holding the iron bow, he looked at the girl on the thin ice in the middle of the lake and said with a smile, "Don't say that. I also made you bleed." He did not raise the iron bow to aim at her, because the previous battle had at least proved that the primordial 13 arrows were not sure to kill a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state without a sneak attack. He never did things that he was not sure of. Now that the Tao addict seemed to want to talk, he was certainly willing to accompany her to talk. After all, according to his judgment, the Tao addict seemed to be very confident in killing him and Mo Shanshan. But since they were enemies, what he said was naturally not good. A man making a woman bleed instead of cry was often associated with the affairs of the boudoir in the tavern. Unfortunately, both the Tao addict and the calligraphy addict had lived in the Cloud Mountain all their lives and were obsessed with the cultivation of talisman books. How could they hear the wretchedness hidden in his words? So they did not respond at all, which inevitably made Ning Ke feel a little regretful. He then said, "Can I ask you something?" Yi Hongyu looked at him calmly, without any emotion in her eyes. She was like a mountain cat looking at a bamboo rat, disdainfully playing with it. She waited calmly because of the huge gap in strength. Her red lips slightly opened and she said softly, "What is it?" Ning Ke asked, "Is Prince Longqing dead?" "No." "Very well. Since I can't kill him, then you can't kill me either." Ning Ke looked at the Tao addict on the thin ice on the lake and said very sincerely, "I admit that I am indeed the weakest world wayfarer in history. I also admit that I am really a disgrace to the academy and the headmaster because I can't beat you. But I think it is necessary to remind you that if you kill me, the academy and the headmaster will feel even more disgraced. I am afraid that even the Divine Hall will not be able to protect you then." He once again used the academy and the headmaster of the academy as his backing. This was a very boring method, but what happened in the Palace of the Wilderness and countless stories recorded in the history books had already proved that this was the most effective method. But the next moment, he found that this method had no effect on the Tao addict. Yi Hongyu's eyes gradually brightened. She looked at him on the shore and said seriously, "Of course I know that you are the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. So it is more interesting to kill you like this." Her tone was very calm, and her eyes were very calm. However, Ning Ke felt a very terrible chill because he could hear a strong sense of madness and excitement hidden in this calmness. Yi Hongyu looked at his serious expression and could no longer suppress the excitement in her heart. She gently touched her chest and said, "I have always wanted to kill a person from the second floor of the academy, but I can't find a reason. You have destroyed Longqing today, which is equivalent to giving me a reason. I am really very happy." Ning Ke felt a little dry in his mouth. He frowned and asked, "Aren't you worried about the war between the Divine Hall and the Academy?" Yi Hongyu said, "To be able to fight with the real powerhouses of the second floor of the Academy has been my biggest wish since I started cultivating." Ning Ke looked at the beautiful Tao addict on the thin ice and did not know what to say. At this moment, he was finally convinced that she was really a crazy cultivation monster. He was also finally convinced that the woman who made Chen Pippi feel tricky and afraid, and even made him form a certain abnormal view of men and women, was the Tao addict. Yi Hongyu looked at the two people on the shore and smiled slightly. She looked charming and pure, and said sincerely, "I am very happy to have such an opportunity. So in order to express my gratitude to you, I have decided to kill you with my own hands. I am very tired. It is Monday. Sincerely, in order to express my anger at work, please vote for me with your recommendation votes. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 261. Looking at the Tao addict's expression and hearing her words, Ning Kai could not help but be stunned. He understood that it was really the moment of life and death. After a moment of silence, he looked at Mo Shanshan beside him. Mo Shanshan also happened to look at him. Their eyes met in the lakeside wind and they could see each other's true feelings. If the Tao addict had not entered the knowing destiny state, then even if the calligraphy addict and Ning Kai joined forces, they would not be so embarrassed, let alone be killed by the Tao addict. However, it was strange that Ning Kai and Mo Shanshan's eyes were slightly anxious, but there was still no fear in the current extremely dangerous situation. Yi Hongyu did not care about their eye contact because she was confident and crazy enough to knock them down and kill them in the deep valley of the mountains. The lake, which had just calmed down a little, began to shake violently again following her thoughts. The clear lake water was sucked up by an invisible tornado and slowly rotated around her graceful figure. The tail of the tornado left the surface of the lake and formed a transparent beam of water. Then, the surface of the transparent beam of water gradually showed dense wrinkles. The faint sunlight shone on it and formed countless light flakes that looked like silver scales. The beam of water circling around her waist was like a fish. With a flick of her slender fingers, the thin fish condensed by the lake water around her waist shot out like an arrow leaving the bow. It broke the slightly cold air above the lake and rushed to the two people on the north bank of Daming Lake with a horrible aura of heaven and earth. Mo Shanshan frowned and stared at the high-speed water fish. She put her left hand behind her back and stretched out her right hand from her cotton sleeve. She quickly drew several lines in the air with her index finger. She did not care about the rapid consumption of her psyche power and once again used the half-divine talisman without hesitation. The talisman power in the lakeside was strong. The water beam fish condensed by the Tao addict's aura had pierced the shore. Just when it was about to touch the transparent air mass condensed by the half-divine talisman, a very bright light suddenly shot out from the depths of the transparent water beam. The light was as pure and sacred as Haotian's divine light. It was refracted by countless scales on the surface of the water fish and suddenly shone brightly. It instantly illuminated the verdant valley in Daming Lake, as if the sun in the sky had come here. The blazing light abruptly burst out, mercilessly piercing into Mo Shanshan's clear black pupils. The girl snorted lightly, her face instantly turning pale. Her ocean of consciousness was shaken, and her control over the divine talisman was weakened. Ning Kai did not expect that the thin fish-like water beam could have such a strange Taoist law effect. He only felt a light and then a sharp pain. He could not help but groan and almost fell to the ground. Sharp whistling sounds rang out one after another. Taking advantage of the weakness of the divine talisman, the fish-shaped beam of water, which seemed both real and illusory at the same time, kept moving forward with terrifying power. It seemed that it was about to tear the transparent mass of air apart. Concentrating her psyche into the water and using light to weaken the enemy was a very simple method, but it was extremely effective. It had to be said that the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, had a perfect grasp of Taoism and meticulous calculation in battle. The Haotian's and Hao Ning Mo's eyes were dazed by the Haotian. And was so K that they could not see. Fu was hit by the Quebec and was about it. However, at this moment, a powerful talisman suddenly appeared on the shore of Daming Lake. The talisman was calm and peaceful, but it was especially powerful because of its purity. The transparent water beam that came to the lakeside instantly froze. No matter how it struggled, no matter how the complicated scales on the surface of the water beam shed off and regrew, no matter how the blazing light refracted from the depths of the water beam became even more intense, it could no longer move forward. It was as if a giant hand between heaven and earth had coldly strangled the fish. The wind on the north bank of Daming Lake suddenly stopped, and the wisps of wind instantly disappeared. The air was suppressed by the powerful talisman and dared not to have any intention of flowing. Even the debris that was falling in the wind also stopped in the air. The stillness was not absolute stillness, but a kind of stillness that one could not break free from. Half a mu of the lake was trapped in this stillness. The restless lake water struggled to flow, but it could not flow out. The thin ice on the surface of the lake struggled to break, but it did not spread in all directions. Instead, it compressed inwardly, becoming smaller and smaller. A green leaf floated to the lake from the shore and was instantly torn into pieces by the talisman. However, it was tightly tied into a bundle and did not spread. It just became a mass of green furs, which looked extremely magical. There seemed to be countless ropes between the sky and the earth by the lake. They were so wonderful that they tied up everything and restricted their movements. Because the talisman was called the Binding Fu. The brocade pouch that Ning Ke held tightly in his left hand had been broken. There was nothing in the slightly charred mouth of the pouch. The divine talisman had been activated according to his mind and began to bind everything that could be encountered on the lake. Standing on the thin ice on the lake, the Tao addict's fluffy bright red Taoist dress was compressed by the Binding Fu and clung to her body. The thin and soft dress tightly wrapped around her graceful body, which looked extraordinarily beautiful and tempting. The red laces that usually fluttered in the wind had long since fallen to the ground, dispiritedly wrapping around her legs. The bright red laces intertwined with her fair and naked legs, revealing a somewhat sinister sense of beauty. Unfortunately, the water condensed by the talisman was still shining brightly. Ning Ke could not open his eyes for the time being. Otherwise, if he saw the tight dress of the Tao addict at this time, his eyes and mind would definitely feel very comfortable. Yi Hongyu knew what she looked like at this time. Of course, she would not think that the picture of the clothes clinging to her body and revealing her curves was beautiful and tempting. She only felt very embarrassed and angry. In addition to anger and embarrassment, she was more vigilant at this time. Because at this time she was facing a powerful complete divine talisman. Although it was far less powerful than that of a divine talisman master, she could not ignore it. This horrible Binding Fu could not bind her psyche power consciousness, but it had bound her body. At this critical moment, it was Imo Shanshan who took action again. Her 5 fingers on her right hand bloomed like an orchid and instantly dispelled half of the divine talisman that was fighting with the Tao addict's virtual fish. Then her left index finger suddenly stabbed out like a sword. A strong sense of dryness appeared on the lakeside. There was no flame in the air, but there was already a higher temperature than the flame. Half an acre of the lake near the north bank suddenly boiled, and the water mist rose. After the virtual fish shone, Ning Ke had been closing his eyes, but the psyche power in his sense of perception had been acutely perceiving the surroundings. Except for the Tao addict who could not locate the position of the Tao addict who was integrated with the heaven and earth, he could clearly perceive the aura fluctuations of the rest of the heaven and earth. When the impatience just appeared, he knew that Imo Shanshan was going to use the sky-burning talisman. Therefore, when the mist on the surface of the lake was rising and the light was overflowing, he opened his eyes immediately. He drew his bow as fast as he could and shot an arrow at the Tao addict, who was looming in the mist on the other side of the lake. There was no sound, Only a very thin black hole formed by the water mist on the lake's surface and the high-speed rotating fog beside the hole. The hollow talisman arrow made of mystic iron came to the Tao addict. The divine talisman bound the graceful body of the Tao addict. Logically, she had no chance to survive before the talisman arrow. However, to Ning Kei's shock, the virtual fish that was also bound by the divine talisman seemed to have sensed his thoughts before he shot the arrow. It forcibly broke its body made of water and instantly returned to the front of her. There seemed to be a faint whine in the mist on the lake's surface that was shining with a strange light. Half of the virtual fish in the lake was directly torn into pieces by the powerful primordial 13 arrows, and then turned into water drops all over the sky and fell into the lake, as if there was a rainstorm. At this time, Ning Kei finally knew that the Tao addict's natal item turned out to be a fish. The Tao addict's left shoulder was seriously injured again, and blood gushed out. However, because the majestic binding food didn't flow into the lake, it turned into countless drops of blood and stuck to her bare white shoulder blade. If the virtual fish in the lake had not blocked the talisman arrow at the most critical moment, she would have been shot to death by the arrow. However, although she was alive now, she was also seriously injured. Her left arm was almost broken, and more importantly, her natal item was severely damaged and might never be able to repair. The girl's beautiful face was extremely pale. She stared coldly at the lakeside on the other side of the mist, and suddenly said with a little madness, "Uncle Yen Sei's divine talisman is really powerful, but it's a pity that you are not Uncle Yen Sei." Ning Kei ignored what she said. He took out the fourth primordial 13 arrow and put it on the tight bowstring. His fingers that controlled the bowstring trembled slightly, and blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth. The continuous shooting of talisman arrows shocked his sense of perception too much, and also caused great harm to his body. But he only had one thought at this time. That was to take advantage of the opportunity of the binding fu to shoot her to death at all costs, even if he had to shoot all the 13 talisman arrows in the arrow box. But the Tao addict would never give him any chance to shoot again. A shrill, angry, and cold shout sounded on the Daming Lake. The Tao addict couldn't break the binding fu for the time being, but she didn't need to, because she was really angry at this time. Just as Ning Kei wanted to kill her at all costs, she also wanted to kill Ning Kei at all costs. The price mentioned in it even included her natal item that had been broken into 2 pieces and was seriously damaged. The virtual fish in the lake, which had forcibly broken free from the binding fu to save its owner, had been torn into 2 pieces at this time. One half of it was shot by the primordial 13 arrows, and the other half was still bouncing on the lake. As the cold shout burst out from Yi Hongyu's red lips, the half of the virtual fish in the lake suddenly calmed down, as if it was mourning at the moment before death, and then suddenly exploded. The transparent water column exploded into a rainstorm, and the dense scales on the surface of the virtual fish were stripped from the lake by some magical force, and shot to the shore with the explosion of power. A piece of transparent fish scale turned into a small and sharp Taoist sword in the air. Tens of thousands of transparent fish scales turned into tens of thousands of small and sharp Taoist swords in the air. When the virtual fish in the lake turned into rain and sprinkled on the surface of the lake, the tens of thousands of Taoist swords had already sprinkled on the 2 people on the shore like a rainstorm. The momentum was majestic and irresistible, like black clouds pressing down on a city, which could destroy everything in the world. I will write more tomorrow. It is estimated that I can't finish this month's task. I apologize to everyone. But I really don't blame myself. It's not the fault of the war. I can't help being sick. I will try to write more before the end of the month to relieve my anxiety. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.